Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Was the Flying Thunder God Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Show me. Naruto nervously scratched his head as he looked at the third Hokage. It hurt a little because, even with all the bandages, his skin was still too soft to handle much abuse. It looked like Kurama's amazing healing had gone away with his chakra. But the aches and pains didn't bother him much because it wasn't really his body that was being stressed. In reality, Naruto was doing the hardest mental exercises he had done since he went back in time. He was trying to think of something important. How can I show that I'm from the future? As he tried to figure out what he could use, his mind raced, and he could feel the third's skeptical eyes on him. However, it turned out to be a lot more complicated than he thought. I might be able to use something about the Uchiha clan, but probably not. He sighed and shook his head. Right, he said under his breath. All the Uchiha would still be alive. Most of what he remembered from the past happened after the Kyuubi attack, which was years before this present. Even if he knew something about the attack, everyone would know it at this time. It was so bloody annoying. He groaned and moved around in the hospital bed in an uncomfortable way. He was already tired from the conversation, and the few bleeding wounds he had gotten in the process were getting annoying and draining his strength. He looked up and bit his lip in anger. Do you have any idea how hard this is? This is the first time I've ever, maybe Orochimaru. When did he go back to leaving Konoha? Before or after the attack? Was something said about secret labs? Bah? Take your time, Sarutobi said, breaking Naruto's train of thought and drawing his attention away. Even though the voice was soft, it didn't sound like there was a lot of time. The third couldn't wait any longer. Naruto grumbled because he was upset. Right. I know some things about my father. He smiled for a moment, then his face went back to being uncertain. I don't know as much about him as they do. But everyone knows about him. No, wait, I got it this time. There was a pause, and the third just looked at him with that hard-to-understand look. Almost cold, which was very different from what Naruto was used to seeing from that man. I guess the fact that I know my mom, Uzumaki Kushina, is the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki doesn't count, Naruto said with a groan. Since little me is in the same room, I guess it wouldn't. He slammed his hand into his face. The sudden pain in his muscles sent a chill down his back. Come on, OG-san. How could I have known that history would be useful someday? It's so boring. Sarutobi cocked her head. If there was one class at the academy I didn't like at all, Naruto rolled his eyes. He shook his head. Well, except for reading about the 4th of July, of course, but that's recent history for you. If you want me to show you something that would convince you, I don't think anything I had with me made it through the battle. I was half naked at the end, which is kind of embarrassing. Demon chakra filled what was left, and it was destroyed, the third agreed. Naruto said in a tired voice, I like that jacket. Why is this so hard? He asked nervously, trying to avoid the old man's harsher than usual gaze. He couldn't think of anything. I can tell you how the Rasengan works. No, there are more people who can do that. You need something else, something unique, like the Hiraishin. Yes, that's a good one. Yes, I did see you use that technique, said Sarutobi. It doesn't really prove your claims, though. The Hiraishin has long been a technique that many neighboring countries want, including Iwa, which has recently crossed the border quite a few times. He puffed on his long pipe and frowned. In fact, just this morning, 2 spies were caught because the village was in a weaker state. I'm not from Iwa, and my father and I are the only ones who know how to do that technique. Naruto exclaimed. That's why it was such a big deal for me to start using it. It's how I messed up and got in this mess in the first place. I'm probably one of the only people who could do what I did. The third Hokage drew on his pipe and narrowed his eyes as he did so. Maybe, but I only have your word for it, and the technique's creator. The third hesitated for a moment, and his eyes got darker. Dead or worse, that leaves me with a technique that could have been stolen in a village where one of the founding clans is known for taking techniques from other places. Naruto sputtered in anger. I'm not a bloody Uchiha. Who the hell has ever heard of a blonde one? And do I look like I have pink eye? He rubbed his eyes in shock. The third gave a sigh. You must see, Naruto-san. Please think about my point of view. Every year, more than 30 spies are caught, and most of them are sent straight to the interrogation department. Many of them have stories that are much more believable than yours. He shook his head. An attack like this would be the perfect time to slip someone through our defenses, and several people have tried. It is only out of mercy that I am letting you stay in the hospital instead of locking you up in one of our deepest cells and forcing you to tell me everything you know. Naruto shook and gulped. Why, you wouldn't, right? He cringed and wondered if he could have handled something like that. Ibiki was really good at it. I should have listened to Iruka-sensei in the academy. He always told me I'd need those vague stories about past wars someday. He stopped in shock. Yes, I can use that. Amino Iruka is one of the new orphans. His parents were killed in the attack. Oh, so that's who he is. Can you give me some more names? Asked Sarutobi, who didn't seem too impressed. Naruto felt a twinge of discomfort when he realized that a spy would also know details about who died in the attack. The old man's voice carried a note of disappointment. Orphans, Naruto looked back at himself when he was younger. Even though I was one of them, I didn't really know many of them. I didn't have many friends when I was young, and I was more interested in pulling pranks than remembering things. I know every nook and cranny from the hospital to the east wall, but names, Naruto sighed, then perked up. Ah, maybe I can tell you something about Kakashi-sensei. Maybe it's about the Sharingan. I know it came from his teammate Uchiha Obito, who died in the Third Shinobi World War. Kakashi goes to the Memorial Stone every day to talk to him. Was that common knowledge back then? At least, it wasn't when I was alive again. Naruto made a sad face. If he wants to keep honoring Obito, he should have started getting everywhere late by now, he said, pausing and shivering. In fact, Obito is still alive. After that, the third's eyes were so intense that they held him in place. Is that right? Where can I find him? Naruto's eyes got narrow. Well, I think he fought my father just before I got here, since he's part of the attack. He wears a mask these days, pretending to be Uchiha Madara, which is weird. I think he's still near the village, but his Sharingan eyes let him teleport, which makes him hard to catch. Sarutobi asked again, where would we find him? I don't know exactly where. Naruto said with a groan. I just know that Dad couldn't get him out, not after he went to lick his wounds in some weird other dimension. Kakashi-sensei can do the same thing, but probably not yet in this time. Maybe I should look into that. He rubbed his forehead. So, you're saying that we can't check that claim in a short amount of time. You must realize that you're not making things easier for yourself. Naruto let out a sad sigh. I can try to come up with something else, he said, giving his younger partner a short, friendly look. You know, my name comes from one of Ero Jiraiya books. Sensei's. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow and asked, is it? I don't think that would show much. Jiraiya writes a lot of books, and that's not something to be proud of. Not from Icha, Naruto said in a snap. My name comes from Jiraiya First Sensei's book, Tales of a Gutsy Ninja. It wasn't very popular, but I think it's one of his best, Naruto said with a sigh and a small smile. Jiraiya Sensei was the kind of person who wanted peace. He thought that by writing that book, he could slowly change the world for the better. You know, the main character was actually based on the words of his student from the village of Rain, a boy named Nagato. He balled his fist. I will break the curse. If there is peace, I will find it, he said. My father must have liked the book's message a lot, and he probably wanted me to grow up to be like Naruto from the story. I like to think I did well. There was a soft creaking from the corner of the room, the opening of a door, and Sarutobi turned slightly, frowning. Jiraiya nervously smiled as he looked around the frame. The white-haired nin quickly walked in and shut the door behind him. He didn't seem to notice how tense it was inside. Oi, no talking behind my back, now. Naruto didn't want his eyes to water, but he couldn't help it. Even after being on the road with Jiraiya for years, he always wished he had spent more time with him. He was important to him, but in the end, he couldn't save him. How many times did he wish he had been there with the man when he went through the 6 paths of pain? Ero Sennin, he said as the third gave the white-haired man a short, annoyed look. What? Jiraiya looked at the Hokage calmly, not knowing what to say. He turned to Naruto and raised an eyebrow. He looked a lot like Naruto remembered him, but his hair was a bit messier and his body was a bit lighter. He was probably the same person, no matter how old he was. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a small book with yellowed edges. Not many people have read this, and I don't think many people would know that quote. How did you find out about it? Naruto gave his old sensei a small smile and just looked at him. Actually, Nagato told me, and Fukasaku showed me that book after you, he almost couldn't finish. His father had always been a dream from the past, someone he wanted to know but never could. Seeing him again was a miracle, and even though the time they spent together was short and it hurt a lot that they couldn't change the past, it seemed like that was how it was meant to be. After all these years, it was hard to talk to the third because the old man had died and left him with pain and a sense of emptiness. Jiraiya was another thing he was sorry about. After you died. Sarutobi asked in frustration, is there anything else you could say? You said you were from the future. You must know more than that, right? Jiraiya stood up straighter, and Naruto was reminded of how serious his sensei could be when he wanted to be. You could tell us something about that future, couldn't you? You said earlier that you lost everything. What do you remember about the Kyuubi attack in the past? It was probably the worst loss Konoha has ever had, Naruto said slowly at first. I can't guess at the huge number of civilians and shinobi alike who were killed that day, whole clans wiped from the village. I lost my family. I lost half of my heritage. When my father died, you, the other OG-san, took back the mantle of Hokage. And he decided to keep my origins away from me for my own safety. That's why I was known Uzumaki, not Namikaze. He paused to take in just how much younger Jiraiya looked, after all. He was thinner and less friendly, but his eyes still had the same look of thoughtfulness and trickery in them. That part of him turned out to be just as timeless as the stories about his sexual habits. I don't think much has changed since I got here so late. As for the future, many of the things I remember won't happen for years. Jiraiya nodded seriously, looked nervously at his old teacher, and then bent down. Tell me, what do you think about my books? Will they become more well-known? The third just stood there for a moment and sighed. Yes, in fact, Naruto said with a frown. For example, Kakashi-sensei buys them as soon as they come out, he said. The nin with white hair looked at him in shock. Are you asking me about that now for real? Well, maybe you know how I'll end this one, Jiraiya said with a smile. Come on, you're an adult, you must have peeped at least once. Naruto spat out. What? Ero Sennin, stop this nonsense. I don't remember the books that well. The only one I read all the way through was Ika Ika Tactics, and that was because you asked me to help you edit it. It wasn't published for years, so you probably haven't started yet. Also, you always change your endings at least twice before sending them in, so you can't expect me to know what your current one is. Jiraiya said with a smirk, he knows me well. You were an editor? I wouldn't let a stranger see my drafts, so we must have known each other pretty well. Oh, now I understand. Naruto said with a big smile. I got it, he said, pointing an accusing finger at Sandaime and sticking his tongue out. This old man is a pervert because he always hides at least the most recent volume of Icha Icha under his bed. Sarutobi spluttered in protest, though his cheeks colored, and Jiraiya let loose a booming laugh. Sensei, you should have told me you liked the books, and I would have sent you advance copies. The third quickly got himself together, but his face wasn't as cold as it had been. You can't officially agree with it if you want to be taken seriously. Besides, I read them for the great descriptions of foreign villages. Is he telling the truth? Jiraiya laughed so hard that tears came out of his eyes. So all the talk about bad manners was a lie? All those times you and Tsunade ganged up on me, Sensei, you old monkey. Sarutobi said, I don't have to explain myself to you. Why, Jiraiya, are you letting this distract you? No, this is gold. Jiraiya kept arguing because he was having too much fun. Then, which part of my last book did you like best? Naruto laughed happily as Jiraiya laughed. After the earlier tension, it was nice to see some relief, and Naruto enjoyed Jiraiya's genuine happiness. After such a nightmare of a start, he finally felt like he was getting closer to home. Soon, his chuckling turned into laughter, and he laughed along with the toad sage as he held his hurt side and his bandages were stretched as far as they could go. For a brief moment of relief, the stress from before and the feelings of loss and hopelessness were gone. A child cried out, and everyone stopped, and Jiraiya coughed embarrassedly. Little Naruto woke up when the adults started shouting loudly. Naruto was shocked when he saw his younger self. He put his hand over his mouth in shock. He said, sorry, to no one in particular. Kinda forgot. Jiraiya looked uncomfortable because he was the one who woke up the child, so he moved forward and picked up the baby. He smiled at the child and said, hey, little thing, calm down. It's not what a future shinobi should be like to be such a baby. Ero Sennin, he's just a kid, so be gentle with him, Naruto said. At that age, what do you expect from him? The child quickly calmed down. The white hair that fell into his hands fascinated him, and he soon tried to touch it. He still couldn't reach the white mane, but not because he didn't try. Jiraiya said, "You're a feisty one," and then he turned the child around so he could see his bandaged friend. "Look at how grumpy you might become as an adult. You don't want that to happen, do you?" The mouth of Naruto fell open. "You believe me?" Jiraiya said with a small smile, "I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. It's not the same as believing or not believing. It's more subtle than that." "You believe me?" Naruto laughed without thinking about it. "Thanks, Jiraiya-sensei. I knew I could depend on you." Yeah, don't think too much about it," Jiraiya said with a shrug as she gently rocked the child. "We're still not sure if we can trust you. I guess we'll find out. If you were a spy, you'd be the worst one I've ever seen. If you were going to lie about this stuff, about time travel, I'd expect a good spy to have a long list of obscure facts to prove the truth." Naruto muttered in anger. "I wasn't all that bad at sneaking into places."
"I hope not," agreed Jiraiya. Sarutobi put his arms in a cross. "Jiraiya, are you sure about this?"
The white-haired ninja snorted, "No, but I need to look at the seal, and it will be easier if you help me. If what future Naruto says here is true, he must have one too. Let's just say that making a fake seal like that just to spy on someone would be pretty dangerous." Naruto put his hand on his stomach and asked, "Do you need help looking at the seal? I could tell you what happened, or—" "No," Jiraiya said, grinning like a man who had just been given a fun challenge. "I don't want my ideas about things to bother me." "Okay," Naruto said, and then he stopped talking. Jiraiya put the baby back in his crib and put his hand on his stomach. A small amount of chakra pulsed, and the seal began to move. The toad sage softly hummed and leaned in to get a better look. The baby made excited noises and reached out to touch a few strands of white hair. On the other side of the crib, Sarutobi joined the toad sage, but he didn't say anything. Naruto didn't think the Hokage was looking at that seal for the first time. Jiraiya ran his finger along one of the lines, and Naruto gurgled and moved away from the feeling. "Interesting, very interesting. It's amazing to see it in person. The key was a good hint, but this is even more exciting." Naruto said, "You have the key. Good, I figured the toads would bring it to you." Jiraiya said, "Please don't say anything. Let me think," Jiraiya said. It was at least 5 minutes before he moved again. He put more chakra into the seal. After a few more tries, he gave up, or so it seemed. He told Sarutobi, "The Kyuubi is definitely locked up, and the seal looks strong and as safe as it can be. I'll have to do this again, preferably in a few more months. I don't have much to add to what we've already talked about, and what you said about absorbing chakra was right on the mark. The kid will never run out of chakra." "I see," she said with a frown. He told the child in a whisper, "It's a heavy load." He turned back to Jiraiya and said, "Your father would be proud of you. Do you need the child to make comparisons? If he's safe, I think we could move him with the other kids." Naruto spoke up again as Jiraiya moved closer to him and asked, "Do you have to? I don't want him to be left alone. When I was little, I remember being lonely." "We can't keep him here, especially since you're getting better," Sarutobi sighed. "I'll take care of him for a few days. It's not like he's been here since he was born, and he won't go to an orphanage for a while, if ever." Naruto asked, "You moved him in here just hours before I woke up, didn't you? That's why this room doesn't look like it would be good for kids. You wanted to see how I would react when I saw myself." None of the two older men had anything to say about that. Jiraiya moved next to him and frowned as he looked down at the heavily bandaged figure. "Now, other Naruto, brace yourself," he said. "Let me take off some of your bandages." As the first layers were taken off, Naruto just shivered, but when the last bloody pieces were ripped off, he choked on the sharp pain. There it was, covered by just one last layer of sticky gauze. The wound Kurama had given him. It was mostly healed, but Naruto had to admit that it was probably the worst wound he'd ever had, and those usually healed quickly. "This will hurt even more because all this blood got stuck in the bandages. Why didn't you tell me you were bleeding?" "Sorry for biting my teeth and putting up with it," Naruto said in a low voice. "I got used to getting better quickly from wounds like this." Sarutobi had moved the crib closer to the door and was waiting there, watching both Naruto and Jiraiya. She said, "The famous Uzumaki longevity. The Kyuubi. The healing I got from my family doesn't even come close." Naruto choked out as the last bandage was ripped off with a yank. "Careful." It was stuck, said the shinobi with white hair in a half-hearted way. What did I have to do? Naruto wiped away his tears of pain. You could have done it more slowly. Just wait, I'll find a way to make up for that. Quiet down, said Jiraiya, touching his stomach. It looks like it's almost all better, he said. His hand was warm against the cold skin. He sighed because it was strange to feel something other than the rough pressure of the bandages. When Jiraiya gave him a drop of chakra, it felt strange, but it didn't bother him because it just touched his chakra pathways. Curious, careful, considerate. Well, Naruto said. He looked down, but he couldn't see the seal. Huh. Maybe you did it wrong. The nin was grumpy. Could you use some of your own chakra? It should work better than mine. I don't want to overstimulate your coils from the outside because it could hurt you more. Then you'll have to take off some of the suppression seals, Naruto said in a grumpy voice. Jiraiya said, fine, and then she quickly untied some of the marks that were written on the bandages. Well, that should be enough for what we need. Naruto shut his eyes and tried to focus. He called up some chakra, and it popped up in him like an old friend. His former teacher, or was it his future teacher? Pulled back his arm in surprise. Jiraiya said, that's it. It's interesting, for the third time. Weird, it looks like a ghost. Naruto squinted his eyes and asked, what? He could barely see the lines on his stomach that marked his seal, but they were there. The seal must have been broken when Kurama was pulled out of him. He focused and looked deep inside the seal for the energy that made it work. Something was still making the seal work, so he would have to find out what it was. He calmed down the chakra he had just brought up. I don't think I can hold it for much longer than that. You still left some of the suppression, and I'm pretty weak. That's enough clear it's that the seal exists. Someone will come by to change your bandages so you don't get an infection. Try not to move around too much, because it'll be a while before you can stand up again. He turned slightly to face the third. I think that's enough for now, sensei. Let's take Naruto to the other kids and start putting things back together. Let's go. We'll talk again, the third told Naruto, and then he turned and went outside with the sage with white hair. They were gone in an instant, taking the crib and everything in it with them. Naruto was left sitting there, staring at the wall in front of him with his stomach exposed and the wound feeling strange. He was back on his own. He was happy as he reached for his stomach and grinned. He was going to have his bandages changed by someone? Without first putting on all of the suppression seals again? He had a quiet laugh. Sloppy, Arrow Sennin, very sloppy. Naruto put his hands in the clone seal in a quick but painful move. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he breathed, and a lot of his still flimsy chakra, which was still sealed away, went into the spell. Outside the seals, a bandaged, sick-looking clone flashed into being and wobbled slightly on his legs. Yosh, the clone wheezed, looking down at himself and wincing. Damn, I look terrible. Naruto had to cough. Get out of the way, you dumb clone, before someone sees you. Of course, boss, the battered clone said. With a gust of wind, he was gone, and the door quietly thumped as he left. As he tried to keep up, a flash of green moved quickly between buildings, jumping over gaps and across roofs with ease. Not too far away, a black shape with a silver top made the journey seem easy. The half-moon shone down on a person with bright silver hair, who suddenly stopped on a flat roof. The green beast stopped curiously next to him. You seem busy, my rival, Guy said, noticing that he was unusually quiet for him. He looked out over the village. A lot of it was in ruins, and even though this side of town had mostly survived the storm, there weren't many families that hadn't lost someone in the sudden attack by the Kyuubi. I feel like I should have helped, Kakashi said, shaking his head in an uneasy way. I can see why they kept us back. It would be stupid to kill the people who would need to rebuild after this is over, but now, he sighed and ran his hand through his hair. It hurts a lot. Guy cocked her head. But still, the village lives on, and in time, the power of youth will make it stronger than before. Kakashi rolled one eye and gave Guy a half-hearted look. If you're about to go on one of your rants, he stopped himself with a small smile. Trying to take my mind off things, huh? He sighed. Well, I guess it worked. Guy gave a thumbs up and said, Yosh. Still, he looked across the road. I can tell you're not paying attention, and you must have had a reason to come here. I think I know what you want to do, but are you sure, my eternal rival, that this is what you want to do, or that you should? Kakashi sniffed. Did you say something? Guy said, that's so cool of you, but his eyes showed that he understood. They were serious and intent. I can understand why you want to see your sensei, even though he's seriously hurt, but I'm sure the Hokage would let people see him if he was ready. If you don't wait. Guy, Kakashi said to himself as he looked at the roof of the hospital. Guy gave him a smile and said, yes. At the same time, his huge eyebrows moved into place so that they hovered over his face in the most distracting way possible. Have you changed your mind? No, I was going to tell you to shut up. I'm trying to get in without getting caught, and you're already kind of an eyesore without all your talking, he said with a smirk. And yes, I'm going to break in there. It's been days, and I want to see what's going on. At the very least, I want to make sure that Sensei will be okay. He frowned and looked down. There aren't many people left, he said. Guy gave a serious nod and said, so be it. I'll help you on your quest. His smile came back. If I can't do it, I'll run around Konoha 300 times on my elbows. Kakashi put his hand on his face to cover the one eye that was still open. Let's do it quietly, okay? I need you to watch out. Guy pointed to the two Anbu shinobi hiding near the entrance and asked, are we going to take them out? Their shadows were just barely visible in the moonlight. I'm not sure if it's very young to attack a Konoha nin, especially at this time. Of course, we're going to sneak past them. We're ninja, aren't we? Kakashi watched the Anbu by the doors for a few more seconds before he turned his attention to the roof. There, two more moved slowly around the outside. They were way too jumpy for this to be simple. If you want to get in, pay close attention to me and be quiet. Yosh. When Kakashi moved his Hitai up, the red eye of Obito's Sharingan could be seen. He looked at the Anbu on the roof, and the Uchiha eye gave him a quick look into the future, giving him an idea of what the men would do. These Anbu were good. They moved in a way that almost no shinobi could have predicted, except those with the Sharingan. Go. Kakashi said, and he ran quickly up to the hospital wall in complete silence. He muffled the sound of his footsteps with chakra while weaving a genjutsu below him to block the Anbu at the entrance from seeing him and Guy. They had maybe 1 or 2 more seconds. Near the top of the wall, Kakashi used a tiny genjutsu that only stayed in place for the split second it took him to flip himself and Guy through the top window. Then, it broke. Hopefully, the Anbu hadn't been able to tell that chakra was being used. Guy closed the window quickly behind him and let out a sigh of relief. What's next? Kakashi quickly looked around and made sure to stay completely quiet so as not to set Guy off again. There were patients here, but since it was dark and quiet, none of them had woken up yet. He crept out into the hallway with Guy a few steps behind him. Even though he was still wearing his annoying green outfit, he was surprisingly quiet. Kakashi had to force himself not to say anything about it. Silence. Before he spoke, he made sure Guy understood the need for silence by carefully pointing at him. We should go find more guards, he whispered. They wouldn't leave the Hokage unprotected, and 4 guards seems low, even if most are busy in town. Guy smiled again and said, that's a very good point. I think I hear footsteps coming toward us now. We should hide. Kakashi made a sign that he understood and flipped himself up. He stuck himself to the ceiling before he was completely still, and he only breathed as much as he needed to. The key to hiding was not to use genjutsu all the time, because that was tiring and many shinobi could sense them. Instead, it was to blend in with your surroundings so that there was never a reason to go looking for intruders. Guy vanished in a small puff of smoke. He had been hiding in a small space behind a small henge in a potted plant, which surprised Kakashi a little. From the next hallway, someone walked slowly but confidently towards them, and Kakashi almost cursed himself when he realized it had to be another Anbu. Kakashi could tell by the way the man walked that he was tired, which was good because tired people don't pay attention. The person wearing a rat face mask came around the corner, presumably on patrol. But something wasn't right, and Kakashi had to hold his breath to keep from being surprised. The Anbu wore a standard uniform, and his brown hair was cut short. Even though he walked like he was tired, he seemed perfectly at ease, which was not what an Anbu should be like when protecting someone as important as the sitting Hokage. Kakashi's Sharingan didn't even have time to scream a warning before the Anbu looked up. When his dark eyes caught Kakashi's, the Anbu didn't even slow down. Yo.
Kakashi was stunned for a moment and couldn't answer. He hadn't even felt the use of chakra, which meant the Anbu must have known he was there just by having very good senses. The silver-haired Junin was thinking about whether or not to jump in and take out the Anbu when the nin saluted him by putting 2 fingers on the top of the mask. Then he went on without being upset. The man looked to his side. at Guy, for a split second, but he didn't care about that either.
After the Anbu left, Kakashi fell to the ground, completely lost. He was confused and asked, "What just happened?" "Maybe that Anbu knows us," said Guy, who suddenly appeared next to him with a few leaves still stuck in his hair. "That must mean we're on the right track, right? It must be his way of saying he's not going to turn you in." Kakashi made an uncertain frown, but he couldn't think of anything else that would make sense. "Yeah, let's do that," he said. Then he hesitated and silently cursed himself. He'd been using the Sharingan for too long, and it was making him confused. When the nin looked up, he was sure that the man had something wrong with him, but now he wasn't so sure. What if they just let someone in? Then again, he couldn't just tell anyone. "I saw this shady-looking nin who was obviously an Anbu while sneaking into forbidden parts of the hospital." Kakashi muttered, "Let's move on, and I hope that's the weirdness for the day." He then did what he said and walked toward the corner where the strange nin had come from. Even though it was draining him a lot, he kept the Sharingan open in case he needed it. A few turns later, Kakashi glared at Guy and told her to stay. A medical nin came out of a room at the end of the hall, where another Anbu was standing. Kakashi thought he saw a man with yellow hair half sitting on the bed behind her, and when his guess was proven correct, he couldn't help but smile. Minato-sensei was here. Jackpot. There was no way that 6 different Anbu would be guarding the hospital, and the wing that Kakashi chose to check first was one of the safest places in the whole building. It made sense. The medical nin said in a sweet voice, "I'll be back in the morning to change the bandages again. Please take a break." Someone said, "Thank you," in a weak, rough voice, and Kakashi stopped. Yes, this is where it was. The Anbu shut the door behind the medical nin, who quickly turned around and walked away. The Sharingan's ability to see into the future would have been too much for a medical nin to handle, but this was different. The Anbu was tall, and even though his eyes were half closed, he was definitely aware of everything going on. They couldn't get by this person without being in his line of sight. Here, there was only one option. He carefully told Guy what he wanted and then focused chakra on his eye. He shook a little as he felt himself getting weaker. Before the Anbu could draw his kunai, the 2 Junin sped around the corner and were at his position. Guy grabbed the man's arm before it could reach his belt, and Kakashi used his jutsu. As Kakashi focused his genjutsu on the man, his Sharingan began to spin. The man's eyes rolled up, and he fell to the ground. "Sweet dreams," Kakashi croaked as the fast chakra drain made everything spin around. He grabbed Guy's shoulder just as she caught the nin before he could fall and make a noise. Silence stayed, and Kakashi let out a sigh of relief as he stood back up. Guy gave him a thumbs up and turned into a member of the downed Anbu and told him, "Go, my rival. Someone has to watch the door until you're done with your sensei. Don't take too long. I'm sure a determined Anbu can beat my henge." Kakashi grunted and threw the disabled shinobi over his shoulder, even though the weight was a bit much. The genjutsu would only work for about 5 minutes, but just in case, he tied a short chain around the Anbu's hands so he could use it again. After that, he opened the door and walked in. "Kakashi?" someone said incredulously from inside, and the door shut with a bang. "Thank Kami," Kakashi said, more relieved than he wanted to admit, and he dropped the disabled nin like a sack of potatoes. "I was sure you were dead." The man who could only have been his sensei asked, "What are you doing in here?" incredulously, but Kakashi thought he heard disappointment in his voice. He followed the man's eyes to the body at his feet, which was not moving. Kakashi moved closer to his sensei's bed and almost fell to his knees next to it as the chakra drain from his eye caught up with him, but he didn't care about the pain. He quickly took off the mask and grinned at his teacher, whose blue eyes widened. "I thought I'd lost the last one," Kakashi said in a tired voice. "During the attack, I thought you might have been killed and I'd be—" He shook his head. "I had to see you just in case the rumors were true, but thank God they aren't." Then Kakashi realized how many bandages his teacher was wearing. The only part of his body that wasn't bandaged was his eyes, and even now, a tiny bit of blood was seeping into the freshly changed sheets. There were so many wounds that Minato ability senseis to talk was a miracle. Then Kakashi looked at the bandaged face and saw blue eyes that were both watching and confused. Minato suddenly jerked in pain and fell back onto the bed with a whimper, which startled Kakashi. Kakashi's first thought was, "I didn't use it. What if I did do it?" The second thought scared him more than the first, so he grabbed his teacher by the shoulder. When the man pulled away, he let go. He yelled, "Minato-sensei," in fear, hoping it wasn't his fault or that he hadn't come just in time to see him die. He moved his Hitai-8 down in a last-ditch effort to break the Sharingan's hold. Not at all. Minato didn't seem to do anything, and Kakashi didn't know what to do. Naruto didn't understand. He had just had his bandages changed and his wounds cleaned, and he didn't think anyone would come see him until at least the early morning. But this did happen. After the medical nin left, Kakashi tore into his isolated room. He was much younger and more expressive than Naruto had really expected of him. Before he could explain that he wasn't Minato and he didn't know how to get that idea out of the boy's head without hurting Hima, the touch of the Sharingan sent him spinning. What was happening? Genjutsu? No, even though he was weak, he would have noticed it, and he was in enough pain that he probably would have woken up right away. No, it was like jumping into the seal of a prison. Maybe his own version of the seal reacted to the Sharingan, just as the Kyuubi always did when it was around. Kurama's chakra could have been reacting to the cursed eyes with what was left of it. When Naruto stood up, the Y ran away. He was inside his head, in the old part that looked like a sewer. Pipes ran in all directions across the walls, and the huge prison gate, which was where Kurama sort of lived, was now empty.
Or maybe not. Something that he knew called to him. Now that it was stronger, Naruto realized that it had been calling out for a while, but he had just ignored it as a distant hum that seemed to fall just out of reach. It was chakra, the soft hum of chakra flowing through his body, but it wasn't quite his own. It was the same. Very well known.
Dad? Naruto asked, turning around to find out where his father's chakra was coming from. He quickly figured out the only likely place it could be, even though it didn't make sense for it to be there since it had already been searched. He walked toward the huge prison gate. Something moved there. Slowly, the dim light in the hallway got brighter, and thin bars of light started to show up behind the gate. As time went on, the bars of light got longer. Behind the middle of the gate, there was a man waiting patiently. The figure moved slowly, and as his head rose, his long blonde bangs caught the dim light from outside the cage. Two eyes the color of the sky opened and looked at Naruto. The fourth Hokage sat cross-legged in a few inches of water, but it didn't seem to bother him that his clothes were getting wet. His long white cloak floated on the surface and wrapped around him on all sides. The edges, which looked like flames, disappeared into the darkness, giving the cloak a torn look. Naruto, he said, and finally a tired smile came out. I'm glad to see you again. What? Naruto ran over to the bars and stared through them in shock, even though he knew he couldn't get in as long as the gate was locked. His dead father had gotten into his head and was on the wrong side of Kurama's seal. How in the world did this happen? What are you doing here? He asked, shaking his head. What? Namikaze Minato laughed softly. It was a clear sound that didn't seem to belong in this dark, scary room with its tall, huge gate. The man just looked and then nodded. Oh, Naruto. I see now that I should have put more faith in Kushina. I guess it was a mother's intuition, but she knew who you were even when I was too busy to notice. I'm sorry. Yeah, Naruto said nervously, rubbing the back of his head and staring. He sighed. I guess I kind of sprung it all on you, didn't I? I didn't really introduce myself and all that, I apologize. It was my fault. Minato sagged a little, but he never took his eyes off Naruto. Now, how old are you? Naruto blinked. Why is it 23? I'm 23, Minato hummed softly. You know, you're almost the same age as me. That's weird. At least you're not younger than me. I wouldn't know what to do if I was younger than my child. He laughed to himself, but Naruto wasn't sure if it was real. When he finally stopped, he looked at Naruto with calm eyes. As for why I'm here, he reached out. When he got close to the gate, he pulled his hand back, and a small spark flew to his finger. When I took the Kyuubi's chakra from inside it and forced it to split up so it could be sealed, I wasn't sure how seriously I could take your supposed identity. Even though I didn't think you meant to hurt me, I took precautions and sealed you during our fight. He paused for a long time. I locked up my own chakra so that it would go to you after I died, just in case, so that I could finish what I started, one way or another. Naruto's eyes got a little bigger. How did you make a seal that kept working after you were dead? Minato had enough pride to look ashamed. There are ways to channel chakra like that, even though it's usually fatal. I had little reason to think I would live, so it seemed right. It could have been Kage Bunshin, one of your favorite techniques, if I'm not mistaken. If I had used it as intended, it would have taken over your body for a short time, just long enough to finish sealing. That's amazing, Dad. Naruto said with a big grin. I learned how to seal, and I'm pretty good at it, but that's something else. Minato said with confidence, given how well you sealed the Kyuubi, I'd say you're better than pretty good. Don't be shy. When you were done with the sealing and that spark of my chakra faded, which was a good thing, I found myself here instead. Well, at least part of me. Maybe an echo or a reflection. He looked at his fingers, curled them up, and shrugged. I wasn't sure who you were, and I didn't have much time, so I didn't think about the fact that you had a seal, let alone an empty one. As it fixed itself, foreign chakra, including mine, was drawn in and locked away. It's only temporary, but it gives us some options. Naruto said with a cold voice, I caught you in the seal. What should the Shinigami have done? The Shinigami got his sacrifice. If it makes things easier, think of me as a copy, he said, reaching out again with a sad smile. Don't worry, I chose to stay here. I'm sure that if I get rid of myself, so to speak, my chakra will join the rest of me in a few days at most, but let's not do that just yet, shall we? Naruto eagerly gave a nod. You know, we've talked like this before, he said, his voice shaking. The seal was breaking, and you told me you had left your chakra to help me if it ever failed. You stopped me from letting the 9 tails out into the world, but your chakra was gone after that. You told me we probably wouldn't meet again, even if he swallowed hard. Same goes for Mom. Minato said softly, I know, and when Naruto looked at him like he was crazy, he raised an eyebrow. I may be locked up behind these bars, but I know this seal pretty well. I changed it quite a bit, and you must have learned its structure somewhere along the way, since you knew exactly how to use it. Your own seal is a little different, I've noticed. You reforged it at some point. Regardless, I figured it out. I got more than I bargained for, though, when I tried to understand my host. Naruto looked angry. You got inside my mind? In a way, Minato said with some regret. I didn't see much, just what seemed important. Your trip here, the Kyuubi, the truth about who you are, our other meeting, and your origins. It was more like a half-remembered dream than a full memory, but it was the best I could do, he sighed. Ah, Naruto, I messed up your life, didn't I? It looks like I did it twice now, in 2 different ways. Naruto mumbled, it's not that bad, as he rubbed his stomach. Besides, the Kurama I knew is gone, and even with all the good things he brought, it's kind of nice not to be a Jinchuriki for once. I'm like Gaara now. If he can be a Kage without the Ichibi. Minato agreed and said with a smile, I hope I don't count as a Biju. Naruto sat down and looked tired. Dad, what do I do? What the hell do I do? He fell to the floor and looked at his flickering reflection in the water at his feet. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. I have a life back home. The 4th Shinobi World War was over, and there was peace. What about Hinata, Sakura, and everyone else? And I was going to finally, he looked up, troubled. The Hiraishin can't go to places that don't exist yet. I can't go back, can I? Minato didn't say anything. Naruto finally said, with a trembling voice, I was going to beat your record, Dad. I was 23, a year older than you. I was finally going to do it, make my dream come true. And now? Hokage? Minato asked, almost out of breath. Naruto looked up and was surprised by the pride in the twinkling eyes that met his. It made his breath catch. Then, Minato's face broke into a grin. Godem Hokage, Namikaze Naruto. I like it. Naruto had a quiet laugh to himself. He scratched the back of his head nervously. Rokudame, actually, and kind of the second one. The war was a bit of a mess. And my name is Naruto Uzumaki. It used to be safer, you know, and my father thought it would be best for me to wait until I was older to find out about, well, you, he shrugged. In the end, you were the one who told me where I came from, which you've probably already seen. Then I punched you in the face. Minato snorted, yes. Kushina must have told you that. Probably, Naruto said with a warm smile. The one time we met, she and I got along. As he thought about that meeting, some of the cold sadness seemed to leave him. But I'm sure you can tell I got a few other things from you, he said with a wink as he ran his hand through his hair. I still don't know why I never made the connection. Maybe I don't look in the mirror enough, and the statue doesn't show all the colors that well. Minato just looked at Naruto for a while, and Naruto moved around because of it. He said, you turned out a lot like your parents. Good, he said with a nod. I saw you use the Hiraishin, and I caught that toad summoning. You've been learning my techniques, huh? I assumed Jiraiya-sensei was involved. Yes, for the toads, Naruto said after a moment of thought. He also taught me the Rasengan and a few other things, but he died before we could get to the rest. Keep your head up, Minato said in a jokey way. Do you know he's still alive? Naruto blinked and thought of Jiraiya's younger brother, who had just walked in. Right, I even talked to him. That's really nice, he said with a laugh. I can talk to him as much as I want. After a short pause, Minato gave a kind smile. So you figured out my best way to do it all on your own. He whistled. That's something to be proud of. I can see that you have some of the skills a Hokage needs. During the war, whole research teams tried to make it, but failed, and they had good reasons to break it down. Naruto said, yes, well, I did have an unlimited number of shadow clones, and it's not like I didn't have help. Plus Kyuubi and I were sort of friends, so he kept me going. Even if he complained constantly. He shook his head. Listen to me, talking about stuff that technically never happens. That is so messed up. Hey, look at it from my perspective, would you? Minato asked. I got to meet my adult son on the same day he was born. He shrugged. My would-be Hokage's son, at that. Apparently Konoha needed more than just the one yellow flash. And then there's little you, too, practically a dynasty. He blinked. Wait, does that mean that I have twins, now? Except, 20-ish years apart. He frowned. That is so messed up. Tell me about it, Naruto muttered, then paused. You know, there was something I was going to show the other you, but I never really got the opportunity. Naruto raised his hand, and focused. I'm sure it'll work in here. It did when I beat up the fox. Look. A sphere burst into existence, swirling in all directions as the chakra chafed against itself, and then he sharpened it, turning it into a whirling ball of shearing blades of wind. Futon. Rasengan. Minato's eyes were wide in astonishment. Is that? You did it? You perfected. Naruto grinned, sweat running down his back. His real body was still in the hospital bed and he couldn't continue on showing off too much. Just a bit more. Oh, I did better than that. But the other stuff is a bit too powerful to pull off in here. I'd worry about blowing my head off. The Rasen Shuriken can be thrown, you know. Tsunade Ban put it in the secret scroll, an S-rank technique, oh yeah. Amazing. Minato exclaimed. Ah Kushina, our son's a genius. Naruto snickered. Not really, but thanks. Jiraiya-sensei and Kakashi-sensei helped me with it. And it took a lot of time, and shadow clones by the hundreds. He shivered as he thought back to that training session, especially with the added urgency that was part of it at the time. Right now, it seemed like he made an impossible amount of progress in a short time, going from a B rank to an S rank shinobi in only a few years. I'm feeling inadequate now, Minato said, nervously scratching the back of his head. It took me 3 years to develop the Rasengan, and I never did get around to the rest of it. Yeah. Jiraiya-sensei was impressed when I pulled it off in a week. Minato coughed. What? Tsunade Ban made a bet with me. I spent the whole week working on it, until I pulled it off. I'm sure you can find that memory in here, somewhere. He laughed at his father's expression. I must be an idiot, Minato said in a tortured voice, slumping. Naruto snorted. You're still considered the finest ninja that Konoha ever produced, you can't whine. Minato rolled his eyes. Yes, well, Jiraiya-sensei does have a big mouth like that. I think he wants everyone to think that he's the best teacher ever, now that he's too old to keep up with the younger folk. The Raikage agrees with him. He raised an eyebrow. Actually, you sort of become a legend, heroic sacrifice, and all that. Oh, brother. Dad. Minato twitched, looking a little uncomfortable, then he looked serious again. Naruto, as nice as a little meeting is, there are things we should discuss. Important things. He paused. With me gone, I'm sure that they'll pick a new Hokage. Actually, the last time this happened, the third took up the hat again. He frowned. You know, the third has this weird theory that I might be you, just with brain damage or something. So, I have no clue how things are gonna go this time around. Me with brain damage. I can see why they thought that. Minato chuckled at Naruto's affronted expression. I kid. In any case, I need you to relay a message or two, since I seem to be unable. But first, do you know of the masked man that attacked the village? Yes, Naruto sighed, frowning. It's Obito. What? Minato frowned in confusion, and he narrowed his eyes. My Obito. No, how could he survived. Why would someone like that ever, he muttered to himself, scowling. I don't understand who could have forced him to behave like that, but I believe you. You would know everything. Obito. It was a mess, Naruto said. Everything has been rather crazy. Just take my word for that, it's been completely hectic. But it all worked out in the end. Even if we lost many great people along the way, he sighed. Since I'm here, and I'm probably stuck, maybe I can help. At least I am not leaving you with a mystery to unravel. Minato let out a relieved breath. I was afraid that your future had gone terribly wrong, and you tried to escape with a Hiraishin, but it seems like I worried needlessly. When I tried to find images of your future, I didn't know what any of it meant. He looked away, troubled. Obito, huh? I still have no idea what I should do. Naruto admitted. I always had a goal, or a challenge, but this situation is too difficult even for me to predict. I can write the future again, since it never was written from where we are standing now. Yet, what if I do something that makes it all for the worse? You lived through a shinobi war, and was the Hokage to be, yet you still have doubts about yourself. Minato reached out towards the bars of the gate. There was a tiny speck yellow of lightning zapping right at his fingers as he snatched his hand away at the very last second. Ah, not to worry, it does that. He flexed his fingers gingerly. I meant to say, that you shouldn't be afraid of uncertainty while making choices, since it's the uncertainty itself that proves your wisdom. Is that a quote? Naruto asked, looking nervously at the gate. Tsunade-ban said something like that when I asked her about the wrong choices. It comes with the hat. Minato winked. Hokage is a position with many responsibilities. A Jinchuriki carries a beast inside, and the Hokage, after a fashion, has to carry the troubles of whole village inside him in the same way. Konoha. It's a beautiful place. Minato found the eyes of his son again, and he shrugged.
Yet you are old enough to have known that there are shadows in the hidden village. It comes with what we're taught to do, how we are raised to behave. To kill, to hide, to lie. The will of fire sounds like an unattainable dream, yet where friendship means closing one eye, love means closing both of them. To turn a blind eye to Konoha's faults. You cannot have a perfect world. It is a good dream, however. And pursuing that dream is a worthy cause.
I think I understand. Naruto moved to touch the gates. They didn't shock him, but they hummed on that small contact, as if some sort of energy had been flowing through them. What is that? He asked quietly. The seal was built to absorb the Kyuubi chakra into your system. Now, there's no Kyuubi, just me. Minato gestured at himself. My seal is eating you. Naruto's eyes widened and he moved his hand towards the small paper seal hanging on his side of the gate. Don't. Minato jumped forward and got another jolt from the gate, and he sheepishly waved his hand from the sudden shock. If you open it up, this version of me will be lost. But if I leave it be, you will be gone, too. Naruto held the white small patch that could open the gate in a second. And it is hurting you, isn't it? I have a while yet, Minato pointed out. I told you. Are you really sure? Naruto took a step back. This seal is more draining than the one you made, since it was supposed to channel all of the Kyuubi, rather than only a few taels worth. With dread, he realized that his father had become slightly bleaker throughout the conversation. Maybe even transparent. That's even more of a reason to speak about everything, before you go back. Go back, Naruto realized just what had made him aware of the connection and sent him into the depths of his mind. Kakashi. Time flows more slowly here, there is no hurry. Minato frowned. Is Kakashi alright? I hope he is. He has great potential and an even greater heart, yet, his life wasn't kind to him. Kakashi could be a great friend. He was. Naruto grinned. He was the weirdest and most impossible sensei I have ever had. Yet, at the very same time, he also taught me a lot of things I hold dear, and he was the one to tell me the true secret of the Kage Bunshin. Good. I know you must have taught him something too. Naruto laughed. A thing or two. So, you met my Kakashi, Minato said. Just before arriving here, I take it? He looked so young. Naruto said the first thing that came to his mind. When he entered the room, it was like seeing a dream. It was like some teenager just barged in, rather than the veteran I'm used to. Yet, he is that hardened veteran already, don't forget that. He's a product of his age, of this war we have just had. Minato sighed. He has lost great many things in his life, and it seems like it's always losses rather than achievements that shape the people into their true image. He looked so broken just now. I see. Minato crossed his arms and paced around for a while. Maybe, he stilled for a bit. No, you were right, earlier. Days was too a generous estimation. Probably hours instead. You did a good job on the seal, I should commend you. Naruto looked away. Is there anything I could do for you? Protect Konoha. Minato began slowly. Learn. Love. Live. Naruto shook his head. I meant for you. I'd do those things anyway. Minato grinned at that. Well, you could help me say my goodbyes, I suppose. He fell silent for a moment, his smile wavering. Kushina perished together with me. Little Naruto. Take care of him, will you? He could use an older brother, and I hope you would benefit from that. Tell him about me, someday when he will understand. Apologize for me. Of course, that's a given. Anyone else? Sarutobi, that is, the third Hokage. Minato took a deep breath. Tell him that he was right the first time we met. I am crazy enough to sacrifice my life first and think second. Yet, I do not think that he has taught me wrong, and I always had his example to learn from. He stayed silent for a moment. He helped me get ready to be the Hokage, and I really appreciate it. Naruto cocked his head to the side slightly. I never really discussed you with him, but he did mention that you embodied the will of fire. Minato shrugged at the compliment. Next is Jiraiya. There are many things that I'd like to say to Jiraiya-sensei, most of them things that you will probably tell him yourself, given enough time in his company. Tell him to remain how he always was. Cheerful in the face of danger, serious in the meeting of a council and insightful in all delicate matters. His heart is in a right place, and by moving around the world he has corrected more wrong that I have in my time as Hokage. I'll speak to Ero Sennin for you, Naruto agreed, and he chuckled at Minato's amused expression. I swear. That man never changes. Who else? Ah, Makoto. Minato shook his head. That is not my goodbye to give, but Kushina would have wanted me to, had I survived. I pass on that task to you. Tell her that she helped my wife more than anyone in the village, and that Kushina always hoped to see Sasuke and Naruto play together. Naruto stiffened. She's Sasuke's mother? You knew him, then? I suppose you're about the same age, so that makes sense. It was meant for you to be friends. Friends. Naruto's expression grew serious. Rivals, teammates, enemies. What? Minato frowned. What happened? Obito, he arranged the whole Uchiha clan to be murdered before a coup attempt, Naruto said through his clenched teeth. Sasuke ran away from the village, seeking power to fuel his revenge. We fought a few times. But, I always kept him as a friend, until the end. I see. Minato looked away tiredly. Do not hold it against her, please. She was a good friend to your mother. I won't, Naruto said with conviction. It was long ago, from my point of view, and it never truly happened if I go by today's date. Besides, if I can prevent the massacre, then maybe he won't have such a stick-up his. Naruto, Minato cut in, and he smirked. If you can, save her. Kushina would have appreciated it. Do you even have to ask? Minato looked at him, proud. That leaves Genma's team. I don't have something special to say them. But they know bits and pieces of the Hiraishin, their own little version of it, in any case. You know of it? Yes. Naruto answered. I asked Namiyashi for help once, after the war was finally over. Those three don't really know the Hiraishin. They are using a mixture of it and a summoning technique, right? Help them out with perfecting what they have, would you? And see to it that they are safe. As safe as a life of an active shinobi can be, anyway. So that's everyone, then. Naruto ran a hand through his hair. Man, for someone who's bad at memorizing, this is a lot of stuff. Minato smirked. There's Shimura Danzo. Tell him that the choices he wants to make, even if they look good at first, will have a price later. Naruto shuddered as he thought of the would-be sixth Hokage. Yeah. Don't need to say that twice. I see that you understand what I mean, Minato observed. Danzo, he truly cares about Konoha, he added, thoughtful. If given too much freedom, he would do anything in his power to help the village. And that would be his and Konoha's downfall. Danzo again, Naruto murmured. To borrow a phrase, troublesome. There is one last person that I should leave a message for, though I'd never expected that I'd get the chance. Minato took a deep breath. Obito. Naruto blinked in surprise. Minato looked uncomfortable. You said he's alive. I don't know how to better put this, since I have no idea what I might have done wrong in teaching him. He was always so cheerful and loving. I can't imagine him harming Konoha like that, not willingly. He paused, looking away. If you see him, ask. All right. Ask him why, from the man who watched him grow up. All right. Naruto had a dangerous gleam in his eyes as he said it. I'm going to find out everything there is to know about that. He sighed. I suppose that was everyone, finally? Minato shrugged helplessly. Well, I don't know if I want you to say something special to anyone else. For shinobi who are loyal, maybe make sure they understand that I am sorry that I couldn't keep protecting them longer, but if I could have, I would. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Minato sighed. I think, you should tear that seal, after all. What? Naruto shook his head. But you said, my purpose was over the moment I realized that you were my son. My wish was granted the second I learned what you have achieved in your life. I am an echo, Naruto, memories and dreams of the man I was, caught in chakra. Keeping me here would not bring you happiness, be it a couple of hours or even the whole week. It is better to end this in one decisive stroke, one last breath of freedom. Are you sure? Naruto rubbed his eyes with his left hand, while reaching out with his right. Maybe there is another way. Maybe you'll remember something else you needed to tell me. And why didn't you leave any sort of words for Kakashi? Caught that, did you? Minato winked. When you tear the gate down, I will get a minute of freedom, the minute that I intended to use to seal the Kyuubi. Last words, if you will. If anyone could use those, it's Kakashi. I will try not to leave you empty-handed, either. I'm just an echo, but I know a few tricks. You'll know what I mean after I'm gone. Naruto took a deep breath. So, this is it? Yes. Naruto tensed. All right. Goodbye, Dad. He tore down the tiny piece of paper and the gust of wind tore at the gate. They shattered and fell down, irreparably broken, and Minato took a step towards him. Another. Nothing stopped him this time, and he ruffled Naruto's hair, before he wrapped him in a brief hug. Live long and always listen to your heart. And then he was not there anymore, vanishing in a whirlpool of chakra. Naruto's eyes flickered open, and he stared momentarily, confused. The Sharingan was gone. Only one eye of Kakashi's was staring at him in pure terror, shaking him ever so slightly. Clearly the boy was unwilling to touch him too strongly, considering all the bandages. Naruto's hand moved by itself, touching down firmly on top of Kakashi's silver bundle of hair. Then, it ruffled them. The gesture was so familiar, yet at the same time, so incredibly alien. Naruto couldn't have imagined how he would have ever gotten the idea to do so. Sensei? Kakashi's voice echoed strangely in the small room. Do you need me to call help? He looked pained. I'd get in trouble, but... I am all right. Naruto felt his own voice answer with a certain degree of calmness that he did not have. Kakashi, have you been skipping out on sleep again? I can tell. Kakashi grumbled something under his breath. Naruto didn't catch it. His lips started to move once again, and Naruto felt that if he wanted, he could have stopped the whole thing, cut the thread, yet he didn't. He just let it felt incredibly weird, incredibly wrong, but he could bear it, for his father.
You keep dreaming of her, the shade of Minato said through his son. It is not your fault. You need to stop beating yourself up about it. You had your time of pain and regret. She was the one who made the choice. And, Rin held to that choice until the very end. You can't blame her for remaining truthful to herself. Nor can you keep blaming yourself for your own choices.
Why are you telling me this? Kakashi asked, a few tears running down from his eye, and his Hittite looked suspiciously moist, too. No one is immortal, Kakashi. You know that even more than some others. I will not be able to watch over you like I'd like to. I need you to get your head straight. But, Naruto let his hand ruffle the hair one last time. Inside he felt weird, restrained. Whatever effect his father's specter had, it was fading fast. The war took away your childhood. Naruto felt his voice cracking and started helping the process, by guessing at what his father wanted to say. You need to take a moment for yourself and try to find what you are missing, to break the limits you have set with your beliefs. Please, Kakashi, live for me if not for yourself. Don't speak like you're going to die. With that one sentence, Naruto's vision of Kakashi shattered. Gone was the extremely competent yet extravagant shinobi. In his place, for the short while, there was Kakashi, the 14-year-old boy, afraid for the life of his last friend and teacher. Everyone dies. We shinobi just get to choose how. And then, there was nothing. Minato was gone. Kakashi, Naruto called the name the same way his father had, with a hint of compassion and sadness, but a moment, he wondered what he should say. He could not just come out and tell the boy that his sensei had just. He could not tear the boy's hope apart, not here, not now. What came out was, "I'll take care of you, I promise." Minato-sensei. Kakashi leaned forward, gave the shortest hug in the history of short hugs, and then jumped back, putting on his black fabric mask once again. Naruto did not have the time to marvel over the fact that he had seen under it for the first time. "Thank you," the teen said, and there was a pause. "You're not going to tell anyone that I broke the rules, are you?" Naruto smiled tiredly. "Those who break the rules are trash, isn't that right, Kakashi? But those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash." He gestured weakly to the door. "I don't remember seeing anyone." Kakashi saluted shortly. "I will wait until you're healed up, then." Naruto looked a little troubled at that prospect, but kept his comments to himself. There was a knock from the other side of the door at that moment. 5 minutes have passed, came a muffled warning from outside. "Oh." Kakashi jumped like he had just been hit. "Guy, we're leaving," he shouted through the door. He picked up the anbu, dusted off his vest a bit, and straightened the animal mask. There, good as new. He dragged the anbu to the door, and he revealed his Sharingan once more. He was very careful not to look Naruto directly in the eyes. "Get well, sensei," he said softly as the door closed behind him. Naruto was alone. Even though there was a storm in the sky, a small rumble could be heard from under the ground. The grass shook, but it wasn't because of rain or wind. Uchiha Nobu noticed the tremor because it was just strong enough to do so. He frowned and reached down to touch the soil, which was shaking. He could feel it moving ever so slightly, almost as if at that moment, he knew something was wrong, and he used his Sharingan to see a muffled chakra spike. It started to bubble up right under him. Nobu jumped up as soon as his mind caught up with what he was feeling, but it was just enough to save his life. The whole world was in flames as explosions went off from below, shattering the surface of the earth like glass and sending trees and boulders flying in all directions with a huge roar. "Intruders!" he yelled as a tongue of rising flames caught his left foot and burned through his shoes as if they weren't there. He cried out in pain as he slashed down at the shadows in the ground, hoping to catch whoever was hiding in the fire. Unfortunately, he quickly realized that the allies who could have used his warning were nowhere to be found. They had been caught in the middle of the explosion, and blood covered much of the ground where the camp had been. Then the earth split open and ate what was left of it, and even that was gone. "So I'm the last one, huh?" Nobu grumbled as he spun around in the air and threw a kunai with a chakra thread tied to it at a tree farther away, pulling himself toward it. It was a good choice, because right where he had been, the ground shook from another explosion, and a shower of hot stones just missed him. In a matter of seconds, it was as if a Konoha outpost had never been there. All that was left was the blackened earth, which churned violently and begged for more blood. "Invasion," the Konoha nin muttered as he realized what was happening. He forced himself to look at the attackers so he could find out where they came from. If these shinobi were smart enough to sneak up on border guards from below, they had probably thought about what would happen if word got out. There had to be at least one more shinobi blocking the closest route to Konoha, ready to kill anyone who got away. That was him right now. He swung around like a big spider on a silk thread and threw a few more kunai blindly in the direction he thought the nin were hiding, hoping to scare them out. He quickly moved backwards and stopped on top of a tree that was on fire and swaying. He heard something clang between the trees, so he knew where his enemy was. He had to get the message to Konoha, no matter what. He was probably going to die if he went up against a group of powerful shinobi, and they wouldn't be sent across the border without a war mission. His quick getaway alone gave him a short break, but it wouldn't last long. The next outpost was a long way to the west, which was farther than he would have liked, especially with his leg hurt, but he didn't have many options. He had to get help. The rising column of smoke was hidden by clouds that were getting darker, and soon no one would be able to tell that his camp had been destroyed. It could be days before anyone found out that there had been a breach. Even though his muscles were complaining, his next jump was faster and longer than the last one. After the creature's attack, we're already short on people, and now this. When he saw movement from the side, he dove down and went under the tree line, trying to keep up a steady pace. He had already counted at least 3 intruders coming after him, and they were getting closer. Nobu only barely dodged a kick and landed solidly on the bark of a nearby tree as the enemy shinobi perched around him. He swallowed hard as the idea of getting away suddenly seemed very unlikely. "Iwa." "Hello, Iwa." The dark eyes of a kunoichi in a bright red uniform met his own red eyes. "And here's the fugitive." How did your village beat a Biju, anyway? She shook her head in disgust as she walked toward him, staring at him with black eyes that didn't have pupils and short, wet black hair that stuck to her face. Are you going to attack me, little Konoha nin, or are you done? Nobu cursed under his breath, hoping for at least 1 or 2 good hits. He wasn't a Junin for nothing. He quickly gathered his chakra by taking a big gulp of air. When he breathed it out again, a steaming storm of raging fire left his lips, threatening to engulf her whole. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. As her hands moved quickly through a couple of seals, the kunoichi didn't even try to move out of the way. She yelled, "You dare to use fire against me?" as she spat pure lava back at him. The firestorm broke up because it couldn't keep up with the burning substance, which burned at a very high temperature, and it was sucked up by the rolling force. The burning tide slammed into Nobu's chest. The pain was so intense that it messed up his jutsu, and he fell like a downed tree as his weak hands tried to strike out with a kunai in a last desperate attempt to live. The kunai clanged uselessly on the ground as his burning lungs protested the abuse, and he whimpered because the heat was killing him. "You won't?" The kunoichi leaned over and said, "Uchiha, don't waste your breath. I'm Kurome, daughter of the Tsuchikage. I want you to know who killed you so you can tell your ancestors," she said with a small smile as she held a kunai. "Do you want to say anything before I cut out those pretty little balls of yours?" "Never," he snarled, and he swung his fist at her with the desperate strength of someone who is about to die. His fist just missed her cheekbone, and she moved away and put her hand around his throat, which was so tight he could barely breathe. He almost died from the hold. Kurome smiled. "There, isn't that better?" He spat in front of her. The kunoichi said with a sneer, "That's disgusting," and her eyes got very narrow. Then she spat right back, and the Uchiha screamed as burning hot lava tore into his face, biting straight through his nose and eyes. The pain quickly gave way to shaking, and his thoughts became slow and unclear. He became stiff and fell to the ground as his last breath left him. Kurome took a sniff. "That was too good for you, pig," she said. She let go of the dead body, and it slowly disappeared into the ground, just like the others had. She said, "Gari, tell me what you mean." The ground split open, and a huge mass of brown hair with spikes and a shinobi with Iwa's Hitai on his arm came out. He took a quick look at the trees and then turned back to the kunoichi. "I'm sorry, Kurome-san. The Uchiha saw our movements with his Sharingan. If I hadn't moved, things would have gotten too complicated. It was also a good test. We now know that our seals work perfectly," he said in a casual way, but there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I made a mistake when I tried to blow up all 4 of them at once. It's good that you caught the one who was hurt." Kurome huffed because he was upset. "Okay, but keep in mind that we have orders to sneak up on them." "I was not seen, Kurome-san," Gari replied nonplussed. "Even if that weren't true, the Uchiha can't tell anyone anymore, which I would call a success." Another Iwa nin jumped down from the trees and gave them both a friendly nod. "Thank goodness, there is no sign of reinforcements from Konoha. With the storm going on, it seems unlikely that anyone heard about the explosion." "Gari," Kurome said with her arms crossed. "We got lucky this time, but if this happens again, we might end up too far from our mission goal. Can I expect your best from now on? No more mistakes?" He tilted his head and gave a small, happy smile. His hair held its shape even in the rain. "In the future, I will try to be more exact," he said. "You know me, so I don't think this will happen again." She muttered, "I do know you, Gari," and shook her head. She sighed and said, "That's why I'm afraid. I should have picked someone else." He said with full confidence, "Of all the Explosion Corps members, I'm the best one for this. I don't see why you would have chosen someone else, especially since your dad made you do it, didn't he?" Kurome sighed and nodded his head. "Well, that was enough excitement for now. I think we should go back underground. This mission doesn't give us much room for error." Gari crossed his arms and slowly sank back into the ground. Kurome did the same thing quickly after. They left behind only hungry, gaping mouths made of blackened glass. Naruto's clone frowned as he looked around the corner into the long hallway that lay ahead. He knew that his basic sneaking skills would only get him so far, and that he would soon run into someone who was good enough to see through them. Still, he had to figure out what his options were in this time and who was in charge, so he needed access to more than just one small room where only the third and Jiraiya told him what they thought he should know. He might be able to find out if the people he knew were still alive or at least get a feel for the place. He had only one choice: He had to skip sneaking and go straight to deception. His henge was good enough to do the job. It was a very powerful technique to teach academy students, but he would also have to act like the person he was imitating, and there was really only one disguise that could get him through the hospital's most guarded rooms without being noticed. This group. When he sneaked past the first guard, he got lucky. He thought the man didn't think anyone would come from inside the room, so he didn't care that he had a blind spot there. Now, he probably wouldn't have it so easy. Even with his considerable skill, the Anbu were among the best in their fields in the village, and his wounds would get in the way, even though he was a clone. It didn't matter, because he had done it before when he had to. Naruto forced his aching body to move in the same methodical way as the Anbu. Their walk was unassuming and simple, but it was deceptive because it didn't show how cautious or strong the walker was. He learned it from Captain Yamato, mostly out of necessity, since his usual way of rushing through was very obvious and would let everyone know where he was. He thought that his old teacher was now a kid again, but remembering Itachi, he knew that wasn't a real reason for the Anbu to not let him join. He smiled at the idea of a small captain and wondered if he could already rule by fear or if he just looked like Konohamaru when he was angry. As Naruto crossed the hallway into a bigger room, he saw an Anbu and got ready for the worst. If things got too bad, he could pop himself. The Anbu was wearing a magpie mask and looked pretty young, even though her face couldn't be seen. Perhaps the tiny bit of pale skin that could be seen gave him a clue. She had probably just been promoted, and the attack by the Kyuubi might have sped up her certification, since the Anbu usually didn't hire young people unless their skills were exceptional. Under his henge, Naruto hid a frown and reminded himself that he couldn't show any kind of reluctance here, or he'd give her away right away. He moved toward her like he belonged there, hoping that he could talk his way out of the inevitable fight. Magpie made a quick sign with her hand, a flicker of her fingers that was almost impossible to see and was gone as soon as it came. It was both a question and a way of confirming that she was Anbu. Naruto smiled, relieved that he knew the right answer. The signaling language hadn't changed much over the years, mostly because it wasn't meant to be a code that could be broken. Instead, it was a silent way to ask questions or give orders quickly. There were different kinds of dialects, which made it hard for spies to decode individual messages when they were in the middle of a battle, but all Anbu learned the basics. I think it was good that Tsunade-ban kept insisting on this. Naruto signaled back that he had a task for the Hokage he couldn't specify further, and Magpie nodded nonchalantly in response, much to his relief. He was very happy that he had learned most of these Anbu signs, even though they were a pain. Tsunade had been adamant that he should learn the signs as preparation for his eventual rise to the position of Hokage, and Naruto had reluctantly settled for actually studying something, which was not exactly his best quality. It took him about twice as long as most Anbu, and he learned a lot more dirty words and phrases than were strictly necessary, but he got through it in the end. He was sure that Tsunade looked happier than he did. After that, he would react with a twitch of discomfort to any innocent hand movement around him for weeks. He would also sometimes be shocked by what he heard people say, even if it was by accident half the time. It didn't help that Sai kept signaling the rudest things he could think of, and no one but Naruto knew what he was saying. Naruto was sure that everything had happened on purpose. I'll have to thank Tsunade-ban when I'm a little slow, as always. Naruto frowned at himself, and the thought came to a stop when his rational side caught up with him. He probably wouldn't ever go back home to talk to Tsunade, or at least a version of her who would remember him. As he thought about what he knew about time-space techniques, he couldn't get the idea out of his mind. As he went out of Magpie's sight, the clone shook his head hard. It wasn't a problem for a clone like him, but it was for Boss. He had to deal with other things, like making a plan for getting away. He went by another Anbu and used the same signals as before. The soft wails he heard told him that he was getting close to the little boss. He went straight to the next door and opened it. He put his hand on the doorframe and looked inside. The nursery wasn't very big, which made it look even more crowded than it already was. Naruto had never seen so many babies in one place before. There were more than a dozen, some of which looked older than a year and others much younger. This was the most closely watched part of the hospital, other than the Hokage's private area, so these kids must have a reason to be here. The most obvious reason that came to mind was also an uncomfortable one for Naruto. They were probably orphans like himself. He wondered what had happened to many of these kids, since he had only known a few other orphans in his own time. Had some of them died, or did he not know what happened to the civilian children who might have been in the same group as the future shinobi? Maybe someone bad, like Danzo or Orochimaru, would use one of these babies for something bad. Only 2 of the children were wide awake at the moment. Little Naruto, of course, and a small girl with gossamer locks of dark hair that looked uncomfortably around herself as she was softly rocked back and forth in an effort to calm her down. The woman that sat by her bedside was probably a medical nin, and looked up momentarily to take in Naruto's arrival. Her job seemed hard, since little Naruto wasn't done crying yet. He was still complaining about being cold, even as he pushed his little blanket away. "Sandaime Hokage-sama left 2 minutes ago," said the Anbu standing next to him as he kept a close eye on the clone. Naruto suddenly realized that the man might have noticed that something was wrong with his henge. He took a deep breath and tried to act cool. During infiltration missions, people were often found out because they got scared. This infiltration mission would easily rank A, he was sure, and they had never been his strong suit. He gave a careless nod and cocked his head to the side. His hand was still on the edge of the door. "Sandaime-sama was supposed to be in here, but I don't see him. Where is he?" Naruto focused on his cupped hand, trying to force his stubborn chakra into the shape he needed. The stories about his father made it sound easy, but Naruto found it very annoying and time-consuming to put a seal on something without using ink or paper. Jiraiya said that his father had been able to do it with just a touch, but Naruto found that his chakra only responded slowly, carving itself into the right shape only after a solid half-minute. Completely useless in a fight, for now. The Anbu cocked its head. "He has returned to the tower, I would expect. He is due to return here in several hours, so it would be best to go directly there with your message." The man glanced aside. "Were you in that room?" With the quickest of nods, Naruto signaled all clear, and moved away, leaving the little boss alone. The Anbu let him go. He hoped the subtle imprint of chakra he had left on the door would pass inspection. Even if it didn't, Anbu would probably know the Hiraishin seal and wouldn't think it was strange that their Hokage set up transportation to the most secure parts of the village. Especially while his child was in there. Naruto knew that if he ever had to leave the village, he could come here quickly with the Hiraishin and grab Naruto. He would not allow his young self to end up in the orphanage again. The seal would probably last for a week or 2, which was more than enough time to decide what to do. On his way back, he ran into something he hadn't expected. In no way. Kakashi had done a good job of hiding himself, but as Naruto got closer to the corner where he was hiding, he could almost feel his sensei's eyes burning into his back. He could take a guess at the reason he was here, now. "Yo," he said carelessly, trying to sound like his sensei. He didn't even stop moving. He could barely hold in a snort when Kakashi's wide eye followed him all the way to the corner. Naruto's gaze flicked to Guy as well, refraining from saying anything in fear of the green-clad terror replying loudly and drawing attention. If Kakashi and Guy were able to get past ANBU's security, did that show how skilled they were for being so young, or how sloppy and overworked Anbu was only a week after the Kyuubi attack? After some thought, the clone decided that it wasn't his problem either way. Later, boss is going to have a terrible headache. The clone had to get some good old reconnaissance done, and he knew just where to start. The air outside was cool, bordering on chilling, and dark storm clouds amassed above the village. Naruto didn't even want to think about how cold the next morning would be. He stood on the roof of what had been one of Konoha's archives, though he was not sure what it was used for in this time, and considered his next move. It was raining, and it looked like it would continue for a while. Still, more dark clouds approached from afar, and lightning lashed at the horizon, briefly lighting up the air, though the rumbles they caused were muted and indistinct. The clone shivered as he realized, to his irritation, that being cold and wet wouldn't help him at all. He didn't want to run wild in the rain, but he figured that when you're poor, you can't pick and choose. At least the downpour would help to hide his presence from patrols. And the patrols were everywhere. Uchiha, Naruto realized with a start when he spotted one of the groups, their famous fan visible on the back of their clothes. It's the Konoha military police force. Since the massacre that left Sasuke as the only Uchiha in Konoha, he hadn't seen them fight since he was a small child, and his memory of them was hazy. It looked like Patrol knew what they were doing, too. They crossed the streets in wide formation, but close enough to assist each other at first sign of trouble. The presence of the Uchiha was convincing evidence that he really was back in time. He could not imagine anyone getting away with faking that after the massacre, but that was not the greatest that he saw. He could see the destruction that had been brought upon Konoha, even from here. He looked around the town and stopped when he saw that huge parts of it were just gone. Whole neighborhoods had been flattened by Kurama's assault, huge areas reduced to splinters and soot.
Fires still burned. Huge piles of debris rose high into the sky, and Kurama's angry chakra, which was thick and evil, hung in the air. He could almost imagine the monstrous creature there, snarling as it lashed out, destroying with a single breath. Granted, Naruto was probably much more receptive than most shinobi, being a sage and a Jinchuriki, former, but the feeling was unmistakable. This was Konoha, and he really was seeing the aftermath of the Nine Tails attack.
It looked worse than he had expected, and he had expected some terrible things. A chill ran down his back, and the clone tried to look away. It was ancient history, especially for him, and he could not change what happened there. Right now, he had to take care of gathering information, and that was all. The first step was to get a fake identity that would last longer, so he focused on that. He was glad to have something else to worry about besides all the people who had died. Someone would recognize his mask, and then he'd be screwed. He needed one that wasn't a duplicate. One particular idea came to mind, and it was just crazy enough for his taste. The Anbu headquarters were nearby. That would be the first place he would go. He was slowly losing chakra to maintain his henge, and he would eventually run out if he didn't get an actual Anbu uniform. Getting one would slow down the rate at which he was losing chakra. He had never had to worry about this before because he always had enough chakra. The rain got heavier, and the clone shivered as cold water ran down his body all at once. Putting on thick clothes like henge didn't really keep you warm. Contrary to what most people think, clones could feel changes in temperature, and if things got too bad, they probably would pop when a sudden gust of wind almost froze his privates off. The clone made an impressive dash toward his goal, hoping that the chaos and cleaning up after Kyuubi's attack would make this easier than it usually would be. The headquarters looked only slightly worse for wear. Rain was coming in at a steady rate, and a few Anbu were running around in a way that didn't fit their professional image, but most of the buildings seemed to have survived the attack without too much trouble. The rain showed where the repairs had been rushed, and Naruto slipped in without too much trouble. Even if he had been seen, there were already enough Anbu around that one more wouldn't have stood out much. No one stopped him when, wet and cold, he ran into one of the supply chambers in the closed-off part of the building, where water gushed through the ceiling. He grabbed a spare uniform and quickly threw it on, before grabbing an unattended mask. It looked brand new, and slipping it onto his face. His henge went away, and he let out a sigh of relief. At that moment, another Anbu burst in. The frog Anbu nodded. Whoa, boar, that makes sense. Right. Take some of these supplies to the front entrance so they can be moved to the secondary location. He paused. Also, try to remember that you have to warn someone before going in here. You might be mistaken for an intruder, not that there's much to find right now. The man cocked his head to the side. You're injured. Naruto cursed as he glanced down to the bloodied bandage that peeked from behind his clothes. It's all right, it's just dried blood. Wounds kept opening up, never did change the bandages. Hospital didn't have time, I suppose. The Anbu nodded. Yeah, I hear they've got bigger problems right now, down in the civilian sector. And then there's Hokage-sama, of course. If you think you're well enough, grab one of the boxes, and I'll do the same. Naruto nodded, grabbed one of the boxes full of uniforms and masks with both hands, and carried it out. Everyone seems like they're about to burst, he babbled, unsure of how to deal with a talkative Anbu. He had honestly no experience with any. It really turns me off. Yeah, us newbies didn't even get the usual hazing. The Anbu snorted. You know, Badger only lasted a few hours before he passed out, and I heard that Magpie found a nice job inside, he groaned. I figured I'd see your face, or mask, around here someday. I've heard you've been through a lot. Right, Naruto said nervously as he put down his box. He was relieved that the other Anbu didn't say anything as they turned around and went back to the supply room. He didn't really have a way out, so he decided to stick around and help for a while. Frog said in a funny way, actually, I heard you were kicked out. What did you do to get them to let you back? I know a lot of people who were let back just because the numbers were low, so that's pretty ballsy. Something like that. Naruto agreed as he dragged along the next box. Let's just get this done, he sighed as he looked out the window. We can talk about war stories another time. He was reminded of the destruction again as he saw smoke rise in the distance. Man, the village is a mess. Yes, but it will recover, the Anbu said easily. Fires will stay strong, and that's the key, she said. He nodded. You look dead tired, though. You might want to take a nap, since you won't be any help if you pass out. That will just put more stress on the medical nin. Yeah, I'm sure I'll have time for that soon, Naruto said with a shrug. The way my muscles protest, it feels like I haven't moved in days. I don't think I'd get back up if I stopped to rest, and it seems like every hand is needed. It's your funeral. One of the Anbu there pointed to the side as they brought the second set of boxes down to the entrance. Put it there, someone else will take care of it. Naruto did as he was told, his heart beating faster and a short feeling of fear coming over him. He knew the man was the team leader because he had a small mark on one of his shoulders. That meant he had more experience, but it also meant he might have been caught. Bore. Naruto slowly moved his head. Yes, sir? I need you to bring this to the guards posted at the eastern wall. The Anbu gave startled Naruto a small, sealed scroll. Once you're done with that, go get some rest and come back tomorrow for more work. You look like you need it. Yes, sir, he said, trying hard not to let his relief come through in his voice. Frog said from his side, I told you. Look, when things calm down a bit, look me up. Okay. I think the new guys should stick together, and you're the only one I don't really know yet. We meet at Ichiraku Ramen sometimes, do you know that? Naruto gave a cautious nod. Wasn't it torn down? First thing we rebuilt, Frog said cheekily. Now, Boar, you should go. You don't want to get in trouble. Naruto gave a quick wave and a grunt of agreement before storming off. He frowned and wondered what Frog would think if he found out that the real Boar probably did get kicked out of Anbu and that he was a fake. Well, he didn't have to worry about that. What to do now? If he did the assignment he had been given, the real Boar would be expected to report back. If he did not, however, that could cause some confusion and the hunt for the imposter would begin. He was pretty sure that if nobody suspected him already, that probably would get Jiraiya on his trail, and that would be troublesome. Naruto sighed as his stolen clothes were drenched in seconds, and the water ran down the back of his mask and into his eyes. It was tricky, running in such a tempest, but at least it was not quite as cold as before. The inside of the Anbu uniform would, thankfully, stay dry and warm for a long time. As he passed close to the center of town and saw the devastation, lightning finally moved directly overhead, and like a hammer from heaven, sheer power poured down towards the village, slamming into one of the taller buildings with a crackling shock. A shower of burning wood and displaced roof tiles blew outwards towards the street below. That was not the worst of it. The shock had displaced something, the shock wave traveling through the side of the building as it sagged ever so slightly. And then a little more. He ran like an experienced shinobi, forgetting that he was trying to be sneaky because he could already see what was going to happen. A single shunshin sped up his progress, and a couple of dangerously fast leaps on the wet, windy surface allowed him to reach the street at speed. It wasn't often that Naruto took such a careless approach, but it was important. Above him, the edifice groaned. He half rolled and half slid to halt at the very edge of the tall building, where fire was fighting a losing battle against the rainstorm, though it had been hidden from the outside. It was coming down, one way or another. The building was doomed. Civilians were everywhere around him, staring at him nervously, and there was also Uchiha, sitting on the street staring through bloodshot eyes, with half a destroyed roof tile besides him. Naruto took him away first, unceremoniously dragging the nin further along the road, avoiding another shower of fire that sent the civilians fleeing and nearly singed his scalp. After he dropped the scared man around the corner, well out of harm's way, he ran back into the fight, and the ominous groaning could be heard even by those who couldn't hear better. He moved quickly forward, pushing bits of rubble out of the way and kicking the doors that were on fire to the side. Get out! He yelled at the closest civilian, a young woman holding her mother's hand. Get everyone off the street, and if you see any shinobi, send them here. I need help. A supporting beam shifted slightly, threatening to pour the rain of debris on top of them. The clone jumped forward and caught it with his hands, bracing to hold it in place. Hurry! I can't hold it for long. Luckily for him, there were more civilians than he had expected.
At least, he thought as he struggled to hold up a roof that was heavier than he could lift, they listened to him. He could see that at least 5 were still alive, and he forced himself to keep the beam up, knowing that if he slipped up even a little, he would pop and they would all die. He counted them as they rushed by him. 3 women, 1 girl, and an older man are helping a hurt adult.
Is there anyone else? He shouted, clenching his teeth. Even though he could try to gather natural energy for a temporary boost, he was afraid to do so. What if he popped too quickly and gave all that dangerous energy to Boss? There was no guarantee that, in his current state, after losing the Kyuubi chakra, he would be able to find the balance quickly. This was especially true if Boss had to do it without warning while chakra suppression seals limited his movement. He had no choice but to get ready for the worst and hope for the best. "Don't you dare pop me," he said to the closing fire as he felt the sudden heat burn his gloves. "I actually can't use that right now." "I've got the last one," said a voice that immediately reminded Naruto of Konohamaru. He let go of the beam and almost instinctively rolled backwards as a burning piece of the building crashed to the ground and broke up into strands of hot steam. The groaning was now joined by cracking sounds, horrible snaps that meant the building was about to fall. Joining the man in a flak jacket who had called out to him without a second thought, Naruto hurried away from the building that was falling apart, hoping desperately that he wouldn't suddenly pop from the stress. He finally stopped 2 blocks away with the civilians he had just freed, and the Junin sighed with relief. Naruto muttered, "That was too close." He flopped onto his back for a second to catch his breath, desperately glad that he was still alive. As he tried to get the smoke out of his lungs, the rain was refreshing. Someone whispered, "Thank you," in his ear, and a little girl hugged him tightly. Naruto stiffened for a second, then loosened up and patted her back when he realized it was one of the civilians. She let him go, and he gave her a thumbs up, just like Rock Lee would have. He probably would have smiled at her too, but his mask got in the way. "Bore," Naruto heard a man say, and he looked to his side to see the shinobi who had joined him at the end and was wearing a Junin uniform. He gave an encouraging smile, and Naruto squinted his eyes. The man was thin, and his dark hair was slightly upturned, but it was drooping from the rain. Even though the man wasn't exactly old, he had deep lines on his face that showed it had been a long time since he was a child. He seemed oddly familiar. "OG-san." Naruto's eyes grew big when he realized how much they looked alike. Naruto realized that this was a shinobi from the Sarutobi family, possibly Konohamaru's dad. He had to move carefully. "Sarutobi-san." The Junin's face was strange for a second, but then it was replaced by a mysterious smile. He took a quick look at Naruto's blackened gloves. "Thank you for helping me," he said, putting out his hand to help Naruto stand up and giving his name. "I'm Junichi," he said, and that confirmed who he was. Sarutobi Junichi, the first child of Oji-san and the father of Konohamaru. The clone didn't try to pretend that all the excitement hadn't worn him out. Instead, he took the hand that was offered and dragged himself to his feet, shaking. More shinobi were coming to clean up what was left of the burning building, but it looked like the sagging structure couldn't be saved anymore because flames were shooting out of the windows. A couple of Uchiha quickly ran to the rescued civilians and moved them away from the street. The building was falling down very slowly and with a certain weight. Junichi hummed quietly and looked over at Naruto. "Maybe we should move somewhere else, because it's getting very cold out here." "I do need to take a breather," Naruto admitted. The first step he took sent a sharp pain through his body, and Naruto realized that without adrenaline, the injuries that bothered Boss were back in full force, and he had just made them worse. When a Kage Bunshin was almost a perfect copy, it was really annoying. Under the mask, the clone frowned. He was glad that his new friend hadn't said anything about his slow walking. Junichi smiled brightly and said, "You did a good job out there by going out of your way to help those people. Especially since I can see you're hurt. Do you want me to help you get to the hospital?" Naruto gave a casual shrug. "I'll live." "I'm sure you will," and I was just going to say, the Junin started to say, but a Uchiha walked up to them at that moment, and he couldn't finish his sentence. "Uchiha-san. We need help moving this pile of trash to the side because it's blocking everyone's way. Do it now." The Junin took a quick look at the trash in question, and there was a clear sign of distaste on his face. He turned back to Naruto as if nothing had happened. "I was going to say that Anbu is so thin." "Why are you doing this?" Yukumi snarled as he walked up to him and asked him angrily. His hair was in a topknot, which made him look like an angry Shikamaru, which was definitely a scary sight. "We're just asking for a little help, a few hands, nothing more. Ignoring us like we don't exist." "I'm saying you don't need it for something so small," Junichi said, crossing his arms. "If you don't like it, Uchiha, go ask my father for a new job. I'm sure he'll take your wishes into account." "Don't get me started on your father." The Uchiha gave in to the provocation, and Naruto was reminded of Sasuke when he was especially mad. He made a sighing sound. Junichi asked with narrowed eyes, "What is this?" "Our Hokage is in the hospital, but your father is giving orders like it's his turn to rule again. Just when we started to respect him, he's back to making us do the dirty work." The Uchiha spat on the ground. "Pathetic." Naruto's eyelids twitched, and he closed them. So, Sasuke must have gotten it from his family, after all. Junichi looked like he was just waiting for Yukumi to start a fight. He managed to look defiant even though the rain had ruined all of his clothes. He didn't seem surprised by how rudely Yukumi talked about the third. Clearly, this was an argument that kept happening. Naruto frowned and wondered if the Uchiha had been planning the attempted coup all the way back to now. Maybe OG-san was responsible after all. Naruto shuddered at the idea, but he couldn't deny the possibility. Sasuke had said something similar in the past or future, but he hadn't really taken it seriously back then because the third was dead and couldn't defend himself. Like Sasuke said, maybe this is where the trouble started. People were gathering around the two fighting Junin in the middle of the street. Two Chunin who were going somewhere else decided to stop and watch from the nearest roof. A couple of Uchiha from the Konoha military police force also moved closer. A few civilians stood a little further away. This situation could get worse and worse. Naruto whispered to Junichi, "Calm down," and put a calming hand on his shoulder. Now is not the time to argue. Not going to say anything, are you? Yukumi moved closer. Secretly hiding behind the Anbu now? Why, Yukumi, was shouted loudly through the rain, and almost everyone cringed, both Uchiha and Sarutobi, and even people who weren't shinobi. A tall man walked up to them. He was another Uchiha, judging by the large images of fans on his shoulders. Go back to your work right away. Yukumi sighed while nervously looking over his shoulder. Right away, sir, he said, and he shuffled away grumbling. What's going on? Asked the newcomer, who briefly looked at Naruto's mask before focusing on Junichi. Junichi's ego was clearly deflating. Naruto watched nervously, looking for a way to escape. He knew that if this got too much attention, he could give himself away by doing something stupid. On the other hand, he was hoping he could stop a fight from happening over something so simple. People seemed much more tense than usual. Junichi-san, the new Uchiha said politely, but with a steely tone. He looked at Naruto and nodded briefly. Bore. Naruto frowned as he looked at the man. He had shoulder-length black hair and wore a black shirt that was wet with rain and sweat. An open front black apron with white squares on the bottom hung awkwardly over his shoulders, fluttering weakly in the wind. The man's face reminded me of Itachi, but the way he set his jaws was clearly like Sasuke's. He had to be the father of both Itachi and Sasuke. Naruto remembered seeing a picture of the man once. It was Uchiha Fugaku, the head of the Uchiha clan and the leader of the Konoha police. Wonderful. Uchiha-sama, he said quickly, since Junichi hadn't yet spoken. Fugaku ignored him and looked at the other man, which was a relief to Naruto. Should I know about a problem? The Junin moved around a little bit, trying to gather his thoughts. Everything's fine, Uchiha-san, he said. The Uchiha head crossed his arms like the Junin. Is it? You and Yukumi-san have argued a lot since the attack, and even before that, and I'm getting tired of waiting, he said, narrowing his eyes. Stop doing this, or I'll stop it myself. Junichi grimaced, ready to say something mean that would probably get him in trouble, and Naruto put his hand on Junichi's arm as a warning. He shook his head while saying, Don't. Why are you people doing this, after everything that's happened? He asked, breaking the awkward silence. Two confused looks met his face, which was covered by a mask. Even though he knew he should, he was unable to step back. He knew above all that the village couldn't afford these small fights between clans right now, when half of the civilian sector was still in ruins. Bore? Junichi queried. It's clear that you have problems with Yukumi-san, but this is neither the time nor the place to settle them, Naruto said sternly, indicating the street they had just left. Many houses were damaged in the attack, and the storm is making things worse. That's what you should be focusing on and working on right now. Your dispute isn't helping Konoha at all, but it will still be pursued when things calm down. Junichi gave Naruto a long, careful look, and his eyes, which were so much like his father's, showed a spark of interest. You're one strange Anbu. Fugaku looked at Naruto for a moment before asking, What do you propose, Bore? The man laughed at how beaten up he looked, how hard he was breathing, and how his gloves were half burned. He then followed his gesture to the crumbling building behind him and the injured Uchiha who was leaning against the wall and still bleeding from the head. Should I let people insult my clan and family just because they're nervous? What kind of example would that set? It's not my job to give advice, Naruto said in a slightly inappropriate tone for an Anbu, letting his sincerity come through in the words. But, I've heard that the first Hokage said, when danger is near, a shinobi must ignore all distractions. I think that saying applies here. And what is a distraction in this case? Uchiha asked with a small, polite smile. The rain falling on his face made him look even scarier. Do you think it's nothing to offend a noble clan, boy? Naruto didn't react to the insult. When a village is hurt like this, anything that takes time away from the repairs and recovery is a distraction. There are civilians who don't have a place to stay and shinobi who have injuries that can be treated but can't get to a medical nin. Whatever trouble there is between your clans, it can't be more important than restoring stability to the people. Every true Konoha shinobi must love, believe, cherish, and fight for the village's sake. You're the leader of your clan, so you understand what I'm saying better than most. Then Junichi started coughing. I apologize, Fugaku-san, I was wrong. Naruto looked away. The same goes for you, personal arguments can wait. I see, Bor-san. That's an interesting thought, Fugaku said slowly, his eyes intensely focused on the supposed Anbu. Naruto nodded in recognition. We'd be happy to help your police force if you need it, but please take care of the most important things first. Taking out the trash is not a top priority right now. I'm sure we can find a solution, said Fugaku, agreeing with a satisfied look and a wicked grin that wouldn't leave his face. We're trying to clean up the streets because if the water doesn't flow properly, we'll have a flood that will damage some lower levels and make everything smell terrible. This seemed like an important job to do until we got more specific instructions. Naruto was relieved. The worst had ended. The tension was finally easing. He looked at Junichi and nodded in a positive way. Okay, Uchiha-san. Junichi, I expect that after this is taken care of, you and the Uchiha clan will agree on where your combined efforts would be most effective. When you're done, you can go back to arguing. At least, that's what I'd suggest. Me, too, a civilian said. I'm not a shinobi, but I can carry heavy things if needed, he said with a sheepish smile. It's probably a fair payment, since I'm currently homeless and will probably have to take up Sandaime Hokage's offer of temporary housing. Me too, added someone else. You shinobi watch over us day and night. Let us help you once in a while. We are people of Konoha, right? We protect it, too. Behind his mask, Naruto was grinning. Now this is the Konoha I know and love. Then, two figures jumped off the roofs. Anbu. Naruto moved quickly to show his identification, but he didn't do anything else. Bear and Dog quickly returned the signs, but then they hesitated for a split second. Had the Anbu finally figured out what he was doing? We'll help, too, if it's reasonable, Dog said with no emotion. Naruto was surprised that they did. After 3 hours of dealing with small problems, Junichi finally called the clone over to take a break. The clone was uneasy because he knew that any sharp object could kill him. He thought that his obvious bad health, shown by his hacking coughs and involuntary shivering, was what got him this job, but he didn't argue. Several Uchiha had done most of the heavy lifting, while the civilians mostly carried all kinds of trash from the water drainage systems. Junichi and the two Anbu climbed up the walls to fix or remove broken pieces of wall or loose roof tiles that were about to fall. After a while, when everyone was soaked and miserable, a sense of camaraderie started to develop. A few small fires were also put out, but even sweetened techniques weren't strong enough to stop the big wildfires that burned down whole buildings. During that time, someone had the idea of sending a lightning nature nin to patrol the rooftops and send the energy of the storm to the nearest lightning rods. It wasn't very effective, but it was better than doing nothing. If the village had been sleeping before, it was only sleeping now. Lightning flashed brightly every couple of minutes, and the rumbling didn't stop. Junichi was carrying what used to be a pillar when Naruto came up to him. The pillar was now just a wet, unwieldy piece of wood on the ground, and when Junichi saw Naruto coming, he smiled slightly and nodded. I think I'll take a break myself, he said, waving his hands and wincing. I would put ice on them, but I think the rain is already cold enough, hey. Don't you agree, Bor-san? Naruto nodded carefully. I think I'll need to lie down for a while. I haven't fully recovered, he said, putting a hand to his side. I figured that, Junichi said, raising an eyebrow. Honestly, I guess it makes sense that you're here at all, he said, nodding. Then go. I think Yukumi has calmed down for now, and I can keep the rest under control. Go take a warm bath or something. Naruto nodded once and put his hand out to the others. Some of the civilians waved at him, but one of the Uchiha just stared at him. He left, and as soon as he got there, He went back to his old ways, knowing that anyone who thought he was strange would have time to act now. Spending hours in plain sight. Was I thinking? He made a few turns to throw off anyone who was looking for him, and then he hid in one of the narrow streets he knew like the back of his hand. When he hid here before, he was only a few years old and had just finished painting one of the local shops a lovely shade of puke green and magenta. Naruto couldn't stop laughing. He whispered to himself, hiding from Anbu and all the Konoha nin again. Life does go in circles. He dove into a low passageway on his side, fighting the water that ran through it and desperately hoping it wasn't from the sewers. He once fooled a very determined Anbu with this trick. No one expected him to be hiding behind the curtain of falling water, and he hoped no one would expect him to be there now. Whatever happened, the water would wash away any tracks. He moved a little farther into the passage and found the hidden spot he remembered. Here, where the Kyuubi attack pushed two buildings together, there was a natural hiding place that hadn't been fixed until almost 9 years later, when someone finally found it. Since it was only a week old, this safe house was perfect for his plans to sleep. The place smelled like old, rotting food. His stomach rumbled against his will. Cage Bunshin doesn't need food, he told himself as he fought a losing battle against his hunger. Oh, how he wishes he could just go to the ramen stand and eat and eat and eat. He would have hit his head against the nearest wall to get rid of the thoughts if he hadn't been afraid that doing so would end his life as a clone. He thought it would be funny to make the boss suddenly want delicious ramen. Naruto forced himself to stop thinking about his stomach, which was rumbling, and he focused. No more questions or doubts. Not after all he'd seen and felt in the last few hours. It was too real for any genjutsu he knew, especially in size and detail, and he didn't know why anyone would want to fake something like this anyway. He was back in the past. His worst nightmare had come true, and now he was stuck in a world that was similar to his own but completely different and where no one knew him. He worried that there was no way back, or at least that he didn't know of one. Later, the clone was thinking to himself. Research will have to wait until later. Despite how hard it will be. I can't give in to hopelessness, because that would lead to failure. His instincts told him it wouldn't work. The future hadn't happened yet, so there was no way to go somewhere that didn't exist. If he was right, and he was pretty sure he was, then he was stuck here and had to travel like everyone else. 1 second at a time. Still, that was a minor problem. Even though he hated it, he was just one person, albeit a powerful one, and there were much bigger problems that needed to be solved at this time and place. The village was destroyed. The village of Konoha, where he had grown up and learned to love despite its flaws, had a gaping wound. Even though he had seen the effects of the Kyuubi's attack when he was young, it had a much deeper effect than he had thought. Rebuilding would probably take years, both physically and mentally. And maybe he had already changed things, altered the future, just by being here. The villagers were confused, for lack of a better word, and the shinobi weren't doing much better. The Third's attempts to keep things under control had angered the Uchiha clan, and the Anbu were far more upset than they ever let on. They didn't even bother to criticize people who talked freely while wearing masks anymore. Naruto was sure that the Third was doing his best, but by not officially becoming Hokage again, he had taken a step back in establishing his authority. Oji-san should have retaken the position as soon as he heard about Minato's death, like he probably did the last time, but his presence probably stopped him from doing so. The situation was unbearable, and he couldn't imagine how the village would handle another disaster so soon after this one. Even though the Anbu had no clear direction, they seemed to be well organized, so there probably wouldn't be any problems from that side. In a similar way, Sasuke's father seemed to have everything under control as far as Konoha's police were concerned, even though he didn't like the power vacuum. The police force seemed unhappy with their current situation, which was probably because of the Third's orders. Most of the work to fix up the streets fell on them because there weren't enough Junin, and the Uchiha had survived the attack better than others, but it was clear that the founding clan of Konoha thought it was above such menial work. So, it was not surprising that the Uchiha had been arguing. Naruto frowned. Oji-san should not have given the Konoha police so much work, especially the kind of work that a Uchiha would hate. They were proud of their eyesight and would be happy to work as guards or lookouts. Putting a noble clan in charge of trash collection was an embarrassment, and he couldn't imagine the Hyuga putting up with it. Maybe he didn't have the whole picture. Did the old man still dislike the Uchiha for a reason? He thought about the fight that Junichi and Yukumi had. Even though it was clear that it was a personal matter, there was some anger in what the second person said. Maybe that was true. Maybe the trouble was caused by a personal grudge between the Sarutobi and Uchiha clans. Could the Uchiha clan's rebellion in a few years have been caused by their lack of trust in the third Hokage? That was too big of a question for a clone to answer quickly, but it was something to think about. He would have to figure out how the clans worked in this time, which was very different from his own. I guess all that schooling is going to help me in some way. Naruto knew that he couldn't let the massacre happen no matter what if he was stuck here. When things calmed down a bit, he might be able to help the old man and Fugaku come to an agreement. Right now, he didn't even have the power to tell the man to make him a cup of tea, let alone listen to him about diplomatic matters. But that could change. He knew what would happen to the clan, and maybe he could use that to his advantage. Not today, though. No, his muscles hurt, his senses were dulled, and he was tired even though his chakra seemed stable. He yawned and curled up into a position that felt much better. Even though he was just a copy, sleeping would make it seem like he was getting some rest, but at least it would help him pass the time a little. When the rain finally stopped, he would try to find out more. Tsunade-ban, you should see me now. Naruto Uzumaki, who wanted to be Hokage, locked himself in the den he had as a child and made plans to change the whole future. I'm sure you'd be happy. He dreamed with a smile, picturing a teenage Kakashi jumping on the roofs and catching lightning with his hands, and Guy prancing around with him in his bright green outfit, trying to avoid the stray discharges of the giant, storm-powered Reikari. The cold was mostly to blame for the short shiver that went through him. Shimura Danzo sat behind his desk with his face scrunched up and rubbed the cross-shaped scar on his chin. He was thinking about something else while he read reports and witness accounts that had been put together from different sources and different channels. His tired eyes had a hard time keeping up. It was a hard job, and not just because most of the information was in a code and recent events had kept people from sleeping much. But his mind still liked the challenge, and that kept him going. There were connections here that weren't obvious, details that weren't said, and small differences in how root operatives reported their findings. For him, it was like having a bowl of good sake at the end of a long, tiring day. Even though it was boring, he couldn't imagine not coming to the conclusions he did. He did well in this life of lying because he had been good at these little games since he was a child, even when he and Hiruzen worked on hard puzzles together and often got stuck. Then again, Hiruzen was just as smart as Danzo when it came to solving these kinds of puzzles. Or, as was so often the case in those days, with the plans of everyone who thought he was weak.
Today was a good day. He was excited to make the next moves in 2 important plays. Even better, to win one in a way that made it easier to win the other was perfect. Danzo stopped when someone knocked on his door. Yes. When the door opened, a servant girl bowed slightly. Danzo-sama, Uchiha Shisui has come to see you. It's interesting about the young Uchiha genius. Danzo tapped his fingers on his desk as he thought about how strange it would be for Uchiha to meet him, since he didn't have the best reputation in that clan. What was even stranger was who came to see him. Uchiha Shisui, the boy who had perfected the Shunshin to unheard of levels, faster than almost everyone except the 4th Hokage himself. There were few among his clan that showed more promise, save perhaps for Uchiha Itachi, and Itachi was but a beginning academy student. Danzo turned over the most important papers on his desk and covered them with reports about the state of the village, which were not secret and could be gotten by anyone, just in case the Sharingan could figure out details anyway. He finally said, with a nod, "Please let him in. We could also use a cup of tea. Please bring us the expensive brand." Right away, the servant said, and, like a good servant should, she bowed and became sparse. No one who worked closely with him was allowed to talk about what he did, so she carried the seal and made sure to move quickly and quietly. Shisui walked into the room with sure steps and closed the door behind him as he did so. He was pretty skinny, and his youth was more obvious than usual. He said, "Danzo-sama," bowed his head a little, and said hello. His Hittite held back his wild hair, and when he turned on his Sharingan, it met Danzo's calm gaze straight on. He didn't look like a 12-year-old kid. Instead, he looked like a grown-up with a lot on his shoulders. Shimura knew how that happened. Once in a while, a ninja village would have a genius like Shisui. Even though they learned quickly, they soon felt like adults stuck in the bodies of children. They learned quickly, moved up the ranks quickly, and died young in a blaze of glory, except for a very few. When combined with immaturity and emotional instability, This kind of skill almost always led to a lot of problems and ways to deal with them. Even though Danzo was curious about the child in front of him and what might happen to him in the future, he had to treat him like an adult now or he would lose respect in those old eyes. He was sure that the company wouldn't let him down. Uchiha-san, he said, his voice mostly pleasant. He didn't tilt his head up or down at all. I didn't think I'd meet someone like you, but I think I can find some time for you, he lied with ease. What do I owe the trip for? Shisui walked a few steps toward the low table and sat down on the ground with his legs crossed. He kept his eyes on Danzo the whole time. Take care. Fukuku-sama, the young Uchiha said. But I have not come on official clan business, not as such. Is there something personal about your visit? Danzo asked, his face still calm and expressionless. You can be sure that the details of this conversation will stay between us, but I don't understand why you think I can help you. I wanted to set some rumors straight. Danzo nodded. Shisui asked with a frown, tell me, do you have a full list of all the people who were in the hospital? Many shinobi and civilians died in the attack, and I wanted to make sure that every single one of them was found. I'm sure you have access to information because your clan has a lot of power, Danzo said with a small smile. Why do you think I'd have some that you couldn't get to? Shisui looked back at the door and said, just a guess. How safe is the secret information? I'm worried that the records for the new Anbu recruits might have been stolen. Danzo's gaze sharpened. Then, oh, I see. And this has something to do with me. Shisui's face was neutral, but Danzo reluctantly nodded when he figured out what it meant. Fugaku-san has told you much. I think of it as general education, Shisui quickly replied. I have access to the Uchiha clan's private files, and I know you're the person to talk to about these things outside of official channels. Danzo slowly nodded his head and narrowed his eyes. Why would someone who had access to such information share it? Is the information about Magpie, Boar, and Badger so valuable that it's worth the risk of getting caught? Shisui's Sharingan moved slowly around. I see that you are well aware of what I was referring to, Danzo-sama. Fair enough. I will not underestimate your sources again. He shrugged. No matter what, Fugaku-sama cares a lot about the safety of the village, just like you do. I'm sure he'd do a small favor for anyone who helped him sleep better. Danzo took a long, evaluating look at Shisui. I thought this was a private meeting. It just so happens that I agree with you on this, Shisui said with a calm look. Someone could have used one or more of these three Anbu as a disguise to sneak into the village and find out what our village's weak spots are after the recent attack. Danzo tapped his fingers on the table and said, interesting observation. Such a feat would require foreknowledge of the inner workings of Anbu. The door slid open, as a servant came in, bringing 2 wooden cups of steaming tea. Danzo and Shisui both kept quiet until the servant bowed and walked away. Shimura took a sip of his drink and said, please remind me. What is the official stance of Uchiha clan, if a need to select a new Hokage arises? He raised an eyebrow. If Yondaime Hokage-sama is dead? Shisui asked. If that happened, it would be a real shame, but I'm sure the Uchiha Council has thought about all the possible outcomes and likely candidates. He said the last word while glaring at Danzo. I can't say I like any of the options. If you'll forgive me for being so direct, neither Fugaku-sama nor I are interested in making a deal about this. And if Namikaze Minato is still alive? Danzo asked with a shadow over his eyes as he put the cup back on the table. Then the Uchiha clan would back whatever the Hokage said, Shisui said. He hadn't even looked at his cup, let alone touched it. Regardless, we must act upon confirmation of a security breach. Hokage or not. Then let's do that, Danzo said with his arms crossed. Let me be clear. I don't have any more information than you do. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place, and the culprit is hiding in plain sight, like in the Uchiha compound where you live, where you could easily catch him if you were careful enough. It could happen at any time, maybe even tonight. I would take care of it myself, but I have a lot of people to see this evening. Isn't it a little convenient? Shisui frowned. Sometimes, even enemy shinobi make mistakes, Danzo shrugged. Who knows? You might get lucky. Shisui sighed as he stood up and bowed. Very well. Thank you, Danzo-sama. Don't thank me. I haven't done anything to deserve it. There are 2 more things I need to tell you before you go. First, When you get a chance, tell Uchiha Fugaku that I wouldn't mind meeting up with him for a cup of sake to toast Minato's deeds, both old and new. I'll let him know. That's good. Second, you said this was a personal meeting, Danzo said with a small smile. I've spent some of my time and energy on you, and I'd like you to do the same for me, not for Uchiha Fugaku. Shisui froze. He closed his eyes and sighed as if he were fighting something inside himself. That would be fine if you gave me the right information, he said in a whisper. His eyes were black when he opened them. Uchiha Shisui, we will talk again. I think I have information you could use, and I think you have information I want. He nodded. I've heard that when the Kyuubi attacked, they killed a lot of your close family members and left you with a certain inheritance. Shisui jerked back. You know what I speak of course. Shimura carefully brushed a finger just under his right eye. Yes. Good. When you catch your spy, I'll set up a meeting so we can talk about this and I can give you the information I have. I might be able to help with the side effects. Shisui turned around and went away without saying anything else. His walk showed that he was angry. He still had a lot to learn about being diplomatic. Still, it was clear that Fugaku trusted him, which showed a level of skill that shouldn't be taken for granted. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. Now that he had won a small game, he was ready to move on to the next one. He was worried for the first time since he woke up early to hear what had happened the night before. The game was on. It seemed like Fugaku had come to the same conclusion he had at the same time. It was clear that the man knew a lot, maybe too much. Still, Fugaku wasn't able to check Boar's identity because he didn't have access to Anbu files. That was the missing link in this case. Danzo gave himself a small smile. He would help Fugaku in a way that wouldn't be clear until a long time later. At least, Danzo knew, he could trust Shisui to honor his promise. The Uchiha was a man of his word, and had presented him a perfect opportunity, even if it freed Fugaku of some obligations. They would not stand with him on his attempt to become Hokage. Hiruzen would get in the way as well. Even though he knew what Konoha needed, he did not have as much power as he would have liked. Not yet. In this political climate, one such as he could not be placed in that position. If Hiruzen went back to his old job, everything could still go wrong. Danzo clenched his teeth in anger at the thought. If that happened, all of his work with Uchiha would be wasted, and he might have to wait a decade or more. By then, he would be old, too. Even the 4th of July would be better than this. It was an intriguing puzzle, he admitted to himself, one of the more challenging ones. Minato was supposed to be badly hurt and in the hospital, but he showed up in Konoha in the middle of the night. Why hadn't Hiruzen said that Minato was fine and would get better soon? His root had found out that a medic nin was suspected of performing chakra signature readings on a couple of unspecified patients and had been sworn to secrecy about it, to the point where even a Yamanaka would have trouble retrieving the information. The only thing he knew about it was that it involved a man and a child. If he wasn't mistaken, it was the Hokage and his new baby. He would give a lot to get a copy of the observations, but Sarutobi had chosen his trusted people well. The medical nin had the utmost respect and loyalty for the third. The same went with any Anbu that had been allowed in the chamber that allegedly held the Hokage, as a patient, or a prisoner. Why would Hiruzen and Jiraiya have counsel between themselves, when the future of the village depended on such a matter? He had not expected himself to be invited. Hiruzen was too careful in these days, but what of Homura and Udatane, his counselors and old teammates? The Uchiha and Hyuga clans are also important. He had to force Hiruzen to tell the third what his play was, so that the third would have to decide. If Minato was dying or dead, Danzo would have a hard and tedious fight for the title of the Hokage, one that he might well lose. If he was alive, then a way to keep the fourth thinking straight had to exist. He was sure that he couldn't beat the Namikaze's popularity, but he knew that the man wouldn't be hidden for no reason. Were there other outcomes that he had not considered? What if Minato was damaged too much from the vicious chakra of the Kyuubi? That didn't explain what he had done as the Anbu Boar, which had only just come to light. If Boar wasn't Minato, that made people wonder who he was. A puppet. Danzo muttered out loud, and quickly shook his head. Fugaku was interested enough to send Shisui to inquire, offering a personal favor, no less. This meant Fugaku was under the impression that he had actually talked with Minato, and the man was not stupid. It could have been a well-thought-out plan on Hiruzen's part to let a mysterious Anbu show up in public to start rumors at the higher levels and keep some people from giving up on their fourth Hokage. Still, this would be bad for Konoha. It was too dangerous to let unconfirmed rumors spread too far. Iwa had been on edge ever since the rumors started, and others would soon follow. There wasn't enough information. He would have to make sure of it. Personally. When one of the smaller doors opened, there was a slight breeze that made the candles flicker. A dark shape moved into the room's darkness. Everything is clear, the figure announced. Very good. Danzo replied, not lifting his head from the files. I need you to set up a delivery for the Uchiha compound. Relay an order for a copy of what we have on the newest 3 Konoha Anbu, as well as the recently rejected Boar. Include a profile we have for the man that is held in the high security wing of Konoha's hospital. All of it, Danzo said with a smile. Have someone go through it and leave only the details that support the idea that the man is Minato. Hiruzen wanted to be subtle, but he gave him a bargaining chip. Whether or not Minato was still alive, if the Uchiha thought he was, they would put more pressure on Hiruzen. The truth would be revealed. It could damage the third's reputation, and even the long wait was doing that, or perhaps it would put him out of favor with the daimyo. Danzo would finally find out what happened to Namikaze Minato, at the very least. Have everything brought to the Uchiha compound. Around midnight, tonight. Stay out of sight. Jiraiya is watchful. Other orders stand unchanged. Yes, sir. Shimura Danzo didn't hear his root operative leave, all he noticed was that the candle flame shook. He was happy. After all, there was a good reason to go to the Konoha hospital.
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.